they will pat you on the knee and say, yes, you can do yoga.
So long as you're moving.
Correct. So long as you're moving, you're doing great. Good job, blah, blah, blah.
Well, let's talk about the difference between social validation and natural validation. Right?
And then you're gonna pay me to tell you to not do this stuff. I mean, come on.
You're not confident that you figured it all out.
I feel like I tapped into the same physics that built this building.
Right.
And I'm able to apply it to human beings.
All right, guys, so welcome to the Project Function podcast. I'm Mike Musiolo. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with CEO and founder Naudi Aguilar. Naudi, thanks for being with us today. Really appreciate you taking the time. I actually had a quick question for you that's going to relate into a bunch of different topics, but in particular, your experience as a trainer when you first started in the industry, kind of talking about scalable progressions. How did you come to the conclusions of Gait being the centerpiece of training, and why you as opposed to other trainers?
I guess the first thing that I'll start with is that I'm not really sure. It's kind of like, what was that term that we were using? It's not about imposing. And it's not about imposing my positions on reality, but more so having reality impose its positions upon me. So when I came in as a trainer, it's like, I didn't know what the hell I was. I think one thing that I did when I came in as a trainer that was really good, that kind of helped me, is I didn't come in thinking that I was some kind of an expert. I was the kind of trainer that came in and I thought that everybody around me was the expert, that if somebody had a college degree, that they knew what the hell they were doing and that I should shut up. In fact, I remember when I first became a trainer and I was doing interviews, one of the things that I was looking for was that I wanted to have a fitness manager that had a degree. And that was part of what sold me, was that my fitness manager, who actually happened to be a pretty knowledgeable guy, he actually had a bachelor's in exercise science. And so I was like, okay, well, I can go with that. And he seemed pretty competent in the way that he explained his positions and whatnot. But that was a metric that mattered to me. And somewhere along the path, as within about a matter of a month, I began to kind of understand who the better trainers were from the not so good trainers, and that the degree had nothing to do with it. There was a couple of people at the gym where I was at that had master's degrees. And I was like, they got masters. These people have master's degrees, but then you'd see them on the floor working with clients, and their clients would just be doing the most sloppy types of movement you could ever imagine. Like, they'd be clearly having them do things that intuitively just did not make sense when it comes to working with those types of clients. And so for me, when I came into it, obviously I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but I came into this having my own suppositions about what a good trainer was going to be. I came into it very naive, thinking that if somebody had the credentials, that they would be really, really good. And so when you start training clients, you begin to realize that all the education that you have pretty much gets thrown out the window when you work with somebody. Like what's in the books does not account for what happens on the training floor, right? And sometimes people will say it's the artistry. You have to be kind of artistic in your way of dealing with things, because you need to adapt on the fly when it comes. It's the art of training, I guess you could say. I still classify it as a science. It's just really complicated. I think all art, to some degree, has subjective components to it. I think all of it is going to have it. If it's going to trigger your brain structurally in a way to be compelled by something, ultimately you're pushing mechanical signals in the brain to get a person interested. And so for me, I think the main thing that kind of got me to start realizing about whether the Gait cycle, what got me to understanding the Gait cycle was I used to have clients do push-ups. I used to have them do lunges, squats, all the stuff that most people would do when I would train them. I never had them do I never saw a single person that was a computer programmer doing heavy deadlifts.
Right.
And you'll never see a trainer ever do that with them.
Right.
It's whenever a trainer is talking about the deadlift is a king of exercises, they're not talking about doing 1 rep maxes or even doing heavy deadlifts with people that are in their 60s who are hypermobile or whatever, or people who have desk jobs, because those people are going to get completely destroyed. But what kind of got me to understand that Gait was important was I did all the stuff, and let's say if I have a client who I'd want them to do prone exercises or whatever, and then they'd have a shoulder problem, they'd be there, and I'd be like, okay, do you feel your abs working when you're doing the plank? And because it's a core exercise, the plank is a core emphasis exercise, and I'd have them hitting a plank, and they'd be like, my shoulders and my neck are burning out, and I'm like, and then they'd come up off of doing the plank, and they'd be like, they do that whole thing, or they start moving around their shoulders because they would end up feeling
Right.
more stiff. And then you'd be like, well, this is supposed to be a core exercise.
Right.
Why is your neck twitching out? Why is your shoulder tweaking out?
Right.
This doesn't make sense. Or let's say I'd have them do a push-up, and I would train a lot of soccer moms, and they wouldn't be able to do a push-up because their wrists wouldn't have, they wouldn't be able to support the weight of their body on their wrists. So then I'd be like, well, now I would start seeing this as a general tendency out of most people. And since I wanted to keep training them, I had to start making adjustments to to have a better way of coinciding with their dysfunctional anatomy.
You were figuring out the progression and regression analysis, kind of like we were talking about earlier, but you need a reference point for that. And then, I think it is relevant because you were saying that you thought people were already doing that. You didn't even think that you were the expert originally when you were at this phase of your training that you're talking about.
Yes. And what's interesting is that over time, as I worked with clients and I'd have them do enough exercises, I'd be like, you know what? Every time I do some more sagittal-based training, it kind of puts me in a safety zone or whatever, like when I work with them. But then I can progressively see that their pains begin to, because I work with a lot of clients who had pain. I just, for whatever reason, I'd gravitate to people that had problems with their life. I've always been the kind of guy that's always helped people deal with their problems, even as a friend. But then the same thing happened when I would work with clients. And so I remember when I'd start working with clients, it would be like, it was, okay, how do I get you out of pain? They'd work with the other trainers. They would be in pain with the other trainers, and then I would have to come in and do it. And the more that I oriented myself to training in the sagittal plane, the easier the sessions would be. But then the pains would begin to come because they would keep sticking into this linear realm.
So they weren't feeling pains while they were doing the sagittal.
Eventually they would.
Eventually they would.
Eventually they would begin to feel it.
But in the beginning they wouldn't.
Or they would start reporting. Yeah, it would be like a delay. Like they would do the exercises, and then it would be a delay, maybe like of a few days. Or maybe after the session they would start feeling pain.
Yes, it's like that 24 to 48 hour residual window.
And I think this is important for the audience just to kind of give them better context. What we're essentially talking about is trying to scale exercise.
Right.
When we talk about scale, it's kind of setting it up to make it attainable for anybody at any given level.
Yes.
And really what my number one concern has been working with clients, and even I guess it's great for business, but it's also great to be if you're going to be a better scientist, you have to know how to reduce things down, right? You have to learn how to
its first principles.
Exactly. And so quite literally from a scientific perspective, you want to be like that, but then at the same time, you also want to make money. You have to make money in this world or whatever. So for me, what I was thinking about is, okay, if I can scale down my training for anybody, then at that point I will always have a client. Because that was one thing that my mentors growing up, when I became a trainer, when I was developing, they would always say, find yourself your specialization.
Right.
Find your niche and then stick to that niche. And I'm like, well, that's kind of exposing me. I'm like, I'd rather be able to cater to if I have the choice to cater to 5 billion people or just a few million, I'd rather cater to the few billion. It makes more sense. I want to be as useful as possible to as many people as I can.
Right.
And so when I would, so how this relates to the audience, if you guys are probably wondering what we're talking about, it's trying to make what we are doing attainable to you. So if you exercise and you feel pain, it's because you are getting ahead of yourself. And so the biggest thing that I've what enabled me to get to the place of realizing that the first 4 were the most important things as it relates to movement was just the fact that I would try doing all the exercises that people would say and following the procedures. I'd even listen to the mechanical cues and whatnot. And then people would feel pain. And then eventually I'd be like, well, when you begin to realize that the book is not painting the whole story, or that the special or the certifications that you get aren't telling you what you're supposed to really know as it relates to what's happening on the ground floor, that's when you're like, okay, I got to start experimenting. And for me, I've always had a knack for figuring things out.
You're observing it in real time.
I'm really good at that.
And I think that's really important because it's credentialism versus hard science.
Yes.
And I think this is something that you've mentioned before, Naudi, when Naudi was more prominent on social media at the time. He was talking about hard science versus soft science.
Yes.
And so the hard science, the reason why we're talking about Naudi's initial journey in the beginning is so that way we understand the thinking that got him to this current point. So that's why functional patterns is called training for humans, because if you look at that scalability, a lot of people will say, oh, it's just for physical therapy, or they see all the movements that we're doing dynamically and they're like, oh, I'm in pain, I couldn't do that, not knowing that the corrective work isn't what we show online. But it's training for humans, so that's why it works across the board. So that's what he's talking about.
Something that we get too when we get clients coming in, they're always like, oh, my specific thing, can you, I need someone that knows that. They're still operating from that framework that they need to see a specialist in their specific, whatever specific problem it is, where it's like, if you can regress it far enough, and if you're accommodating for the anatomy of the human, then we can
usually
help them.
If somebody has like a pain in a given point, usually what ends up happening is like that place is not moving. Usually those places where you feel pain, oftentimes there's an area in that spot that may not be moving. It's not always the case. I should not say that place is not moving. In many cases, that place is not moving. And the reason that it's not moving is because the rest of the body isn't allowing that area to move.
Right.
And so I think many times when people say, I have this pain spot or this pain spot, like how many times have you guys had clients where you work with somebody and they'll have a pain in their knee, you fix it, and then a pain ends up popping up somewhere else after the
all
fact.
the time.
Sure.
Because the body is constantly compensating, and oftentimes it overcompensates, and that's when you end up dealing with pain. But one of the main things that people fail to recognize is that if you have a failure of basic movement competence, you're going to feel pain in some way, shape, or form. That the reason that you feel pain is because, as it relates to physical movement competence, it's not there within you.
Right.
And until you solve for that problem, you're never going to really be able to figure your stuff out. And so quite literally, to go back to that whole question about how I came to arrive at the first four, or the big four, whatever, standing, walking, running, throwing. What got me down that path was going through all these regression analysis. And when you deal with enough people that are in so much pain, eventually you're like, well, what's the only thing that I can have them work on? Well, it seems like bipedal movement, rotational movement, it doesn't take, it's hard if you do, and that's the whole thing. Rotational training is very, very dangerous if you do it the wrong way.
Sure.
For whatever reason, my body caters to rotation.
Sure.
I think every trainer does something right. Every person does something right with their movement of their body.
That's right.
The kind of rotation that I did, which is kind of still sloppy, it's still not where it needs to be, but the rotation that I did, it at least translated towards helping other people figure their stuff out, from people that are just getting into fitness to people that are pro athletes or world champions.
That's right.
It scales up. And
that's
so
the scalability.
My thing that I happened to be pretty good at, it was rotation.
Right.
And then I would implement that with rotation and lateral movement.
Sure.
And so I implemented that with clients, and I started finding that it worked really, really well. That's when I started figuring out contralateral step presses, step rows. To the audience, if you guys don't know what those movements really are, it's just taking a step with the press and a row. You see it all the time on Instagram.
That's right.
It's everywhere now. But I was doing this back in, I think, 2007, something like that.
Right.
2008, around
Very
that time.
fundamental movement in functional patterns. We call that's basically the bench press, the deadlift, and the squat of functional patterns. They're like derivatives of the step press and the step row.
Yes, and that's the whole thing too that I think I want to mainly cover with people is that I've never just believed in doing gait training, because if you look at so many of the movements that I did in the initial functional patterns videos, it's not just training gait.
Sure.
It's just more what people need to think about as it relates to the gait cycle or the first four.
Yeah.
Is that they are the most basic derivatives of all motion you're going to do.
They're common denominators.
So if I'm going to throw an uppercut, there's going to be some aspects of the gait cycle in that uppercut. There's going to be some aspects of throwing in that uppercut. If I throw a roundhouse kick, there's going to be aspects of running and throwing in that roundhouse kick. If I jump, believe it or not, there is going to be some aspects of running and throwing in the jump itself. The mechanical propulsion that's involved in the first four pops up everywhere when it comes to movement. And it's one of the things that I've dealt with the most frustration is that, when people say it, functional patterns talks about the first four, we're just telling people, give yourself a foundation to work from, and then at that point you can diversify into all kinds of different movements. And that's the biggest thing. For me, I always think about it, I'm like, I want there to be movement diversity. Increasing that diversity, but it needs to be sustainable diversity. And unfortunately, most of the time when people think about trying to implement diversity in their training, they're not thinking from the realm of can I do this for the next 50, 60 years. And it's not just that. It's what are the downstream benefits of that? There's a guy named Michael Levin, Professor Michael Levin. We talked about him before in our group, in the group chat. And Michael Levin, and this is what I felt for the longest time. I felt like if you could move correctly, if you could move in a way that really is like fundamentally like right, if it's fundamentally correct, that I believe it's going to activate regeneration, not degeneration.
Sure.
That dysfunctional movement is degeneration,
right,
and functional movement represents regeneration. I thought what was interesting is that on one video, I started watching a bunch of his lectures, and I sent him some emails to see if I could get an answer to it, and I couldn't. So then I just started watching a bunch of his videos, and I had pondered the question a long time ago that if you can have optimal biomechanics, will you become regenerative? And what he studies regeneration, and he studies planaria. And planaria is actually an immortal organism. It's like a worm, and it's immortal. And what he said is that at some point, a guy asked him, like, okay, what would it take for a human being to be able to have a similar regenerative capability to that of a salamander or that of a planaria? And he wound up saying, which to me was like, it's intuitively, it makes sense.
Sure.
And this guy's probably going to be next in line to get a Nobel Prize, just so everybody understands. This guy isn't just any average Joe professor.
Yeah, he's an intellectual
If you look up like the Xenobots experiments that he's done, it's just it's absolutely just astounding
nuts.
what this guy's doing. Just unbelievably brilliant. But anyway, his guess is that if you can preserve, and in his terms, I'm paraphrasing, but he said if you can preserve your architecture, then essentially when an organism is able to preserve its architecture, it is able to regenerate.
Right.
That's the general mechanism by which organisms regenerate, is the preservation of their architecture.
Sure.
So the same thing goes with human beings, except there's no architecture to really preserve. Right. Because our structure is so broken down.
Yeah.
We are so broken down, we never actually developed into what a human organism is yet.
Right.
Some humans have done it, but most humans have not. And I think that we're still in a stage of development.
Right.
But we've reached a point of we're reaching a point of decline right now. But I think technology is going to end up, especially through the technologies that we develop through functional patterns. I believe that we should be able to get us out of the situation that we're in, and then from there eventually reach the point that we were supposed to be at, and then it's going to become much easier for people to understand like why standing, walking, running, and throwing, like why these first four functions are so important, because these are the functions that actually will establish our architecture. And never mind that, they will also be the functions that will preserve our architecture. Right. And that's what's going to ultimately end up bringing about regeneration.
And that's why we've looked at the best movers, et cetera, et cetera. We're using them as the initial reference point. And what Naudi's saying is even with them, there is further to go, but we need an initial reference point as to what that architecture is. Otherwise, we're guessing. So, but one thing real quick I wanted to piggyback off of that previous topic is, Rodney, I'm sure, can attest to this. When we ask clients to follow a movement elimination protocol, in many instances, like we've had a client say previously, I'll use an example, well, who isn't that for me to decide whether or not I can do yoga with functional patterns or whether or not I can do weightlifting with functional patterns? But once again, you guys, you really want to look at the through line with this stuff, because these first principles interact with each other and over again. The reason why we're asking Naudi about the imposition versus observation thing and what he's observed to come to these conclusions is that because we didn't decide it, Naudi observed it initially and therefore has brought this to light so that way we can do the same thing. We didn't decide, nature decided that this is the way that humans move, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not imposing that on you. This is what we've observed, and we think that it's our responsibility to tell you in order to get the best results than stopping yoga, stopping weightlifting, et cetera, especially initially, is your best bet to get the best results with functional patterns.
No, absolutely. And that, what Mike's talking about, and I'll probably... I'll explain it a little bit more deeply. The mentality of the person that does fitness, what they're thinking on is they come from this perspective of assuming that you always have to add things on to their training. That if you're always doing more, that it's better. Yep. And what I've learned over my career is that clearly more is not better. Right. The key point is finding quality stimulus and the right amounts of it.
Right.
That's like the right quality stimulus for yourself.
Right.
And then finding what the proper dosage of that stimulus is going to be.
Right.
And so when people come in with this mindset of like, okay, I want to come in and train and I want to do so let's say I'm going to have a client, I work with them and they're like, okay, what should I do in my off time? And I would oftentimes will say, well, I just readjusted your structure.
Right.
We just did all these readjustments.
Yes.
The optimal thing to do would maybe be to the myofascial releases that I recommend for you.
Sure.
And then probably nothing at all.
Yeah.
Like literally nothing. Get off your phone.
That's right.
Get outside, go sit in the sun, go chill out and do nothing. But humans don't seem to be programmed that way. Biology just does not seem to be programmed that way, because if you just sat around and did nothing, you'd either starve or you're going to get hunted down and killed.
Right.
And then it's game over, right? Yeah. So it's like there's this anxiety that I believe that biological organisms, especially like mammals, like primates, have, because we're social. And we are prone to always wanting to be in a constant state of activity to some degree or the other. So I think intuitively, when people think about fitness, it's like, I need to constantly keep moving and whatnot.
Yes.
And so what I learned over time is that whenever you're trying to find order in the body, while there's so much chaos going on within it, is really, really complicated.
Yes.
And that what I think people fail to recognize, and I think anybody I've just gotten into really trying to figure out what entropy is. I've known about it intuitively because I've visualized it. I've talked about things that relate to entropy, but it seems like it's easier to disorder things than it is to order things. Like I could find so many ways to break this building down. I could grab that camera, slam it on the ground. I could grab this chair, throw it at that window and break it.
Totally.
David's right there behind the phone right now. I could kick that thing over there and I could damage him. He could knock the TV that's behind him down, and then that would cause all sorts of damage.
Yep.
There's very many ways to create chaos in this environment that's structured, in this orderly building that we have with 90-degree angles and 45-degree angles everywhere, right?
Yep.
But there's very few ways to actually make it more ordered, to make it more structured.
Right.
It takes way more knowledge in order to be able to structure things than it takes to destructure things.
Totally.
And so when it comes to working with clients, they don't see that. No. When I look at their gait cycles, when I look at how they move, I'm looking at chaos.
Yeah.
And it's like, it appears to be chaotic. It's not just, there's a reason for everything looking the way that it does.
Sure.
There's a driver behind everything that's there. It's just very difficult to account for.
Yep.
But if I want to make it more ordered and more to find predictability so I can help them fix their problems, it takes a very specific kind of thinking, a very specific method of analysis needs to be employed in order to be able to make these changes on people stick. And so their mentality of thinking that if I tack on more types of training goes against this idea of reordering their body more effectively.
Yes.
People are disordered. They have disorders.
That's right.
And so ultimately they need to be more orderly in the way that they function so they can fix their physicality.
And it relates to their mentality and everything too.
And I tend to find that people, the more disordered they are with their body, typically the more emotionally unstable they end up becoming in many ways. And we are becoming increasingly ordered as it relates to technological development, but not necessarily with our physicality.
No.
And so what I try and what Mike was talking about before with this whole thing with movement elimination protocols.
Right.
It's trying to step back. Like let's say if you're tackling a task and you're trying to figure it out, sometimes the best thing that you can do is step back and away from it to assess what the hell is going on to figure yourself out.
Yep.
Because if you just keep hammering stuff and putting things together, what you end up realizing is that you start building on disorder, and then that disorder ends up bringing about more disorder, and then it just becomes a constant cycle of degradation that takes place after the fact.
Yep.
And so when we work with clients, one of the most difficult things that I had to deal with. Actually, you know what? It was only like that when I work with my clients, they just listened to me.
Sure.
They just trusted me because anytime that they would listen to me, they'd be like, I just feel a lot better. So by the time my history was that I was a trainer.
Yep.
Then eventually I became an educator. I started having many trainers come up and say, hey, I want to come to your gym and I want to shadow you. So I had a lot of trainers reach out and say, hey, I want to shadow you. And then eventually I wound up becoming a certifier. I became an educator to trainers. And that's where most of this problem occurred.
Right.
Was when I started dealing with trainers who oftentimes are fitness addicts.
That's right.
That's when this problem began to emerge. And these fitness addicts have also been communicating to their clients they should just keep adding more and more and more onto their training. So finally, by the time I got into having to deal with the narratives of the industry, it's pretty much, I've been in a constant state of debate for the last since like about 2012, I think
Right.
it is, 2011.
Right.
So I don't know.
Since you had a following online, because
Pretty much.
being an educator came a following online and everything too, right? That's kind of
and so this mindset of disordering the body by
Right.
continuously doing different things
Yeah.
it's been really, really a big struggle. But I think one thing people really need to think about as it relates to this order and chaos,
Right.
as it relates to what's going on with their body, is that
Yep.
until you step back and you begin to self-analyze and observe what you move like,
Mm-hmm.
you're never going to account for this disorder that's going on with you. And I think most of these disorders that exist are quite literally the byproduct of not controlling for chaos. And it's always important to consider that it's much easier to disorder things than it is to order things. You could screw things up. I could smash my head into that wall
Yeah.
in many regards,
Yeah.
but to actually give my body benefit,
Yes.
how many kinds of stimulus will actually enable me to be? Because if we understand this deep enough,
Right.
if we understand this idea of structure deep enough, then I was talking to ChatGPT and I started like asking it questions, but it pretty much I narrowed it down to this place where it's
That's
like if we
right.
could find efficiency I said, how do we slow down entropy in the body? And I started asking it a set of questions, and it essentially said that if you could become so structured in your body to just be able to breathe and live off of photons, then the probability is that once you attain that structure, that you could perhaps attain some level of immortality or high levels of regenerative capabilities.
Right.
And so the benefits of operating within this framework of thinking about creating order in your body, right? Preserving your architecture
Yes.
is fundamental. And I think that to me is, for whatever reason, I intuitively gravitated to that.
Sure.
Because the reason I also, let me put it this way, because I also have to clarify this position. I didn't just say, hey, when we talk about imposition versus arrival at conclusions,
Right.
what got me to arrive at the conclusion is that every single time I would do X kinds of exercises,
Right.
pain would reduce.
That's
Every
right.
time I would do this technique, pain would reduce, movement would improve, lifestyle would improve, cognitive benefits would come along for the ride.
Sure.
So what made me arrive at the path that I was on was I would test for you guys see, not many people have gotten to see me train clients.
Sure.
At some point I'll have it to where you guys get to see me train clients. It looks like a train wreck. Anytime I've had interns and I have them come in, it's demoralizing. At some point I had to stop having interns because they would be like, oh my God, this is what the creative process looks like.
Yeah.
They were thinking of, oh, Naudi's writing down these equations, he's writing down plans and doing
Sure.
all this stuff. But when they see the art of addressing a person's dysfunctions, they're like, holy crap, because through every session I'll tackle 50 different concepts
Sure.
in one session. I'll be like, and I'll test it. Like it takes me about maybe 15 seconds to test it. David, you've seen it. I'll test it for about 15 seconds.
Sure.
And then I abandon it because I'm like, clearly that's not the mechanism this person needs.
Sure.
On to the next one.
That's
on to
right.
the next one. On to the next one. So in every session, if I got 30 to 50 different mechanisms that I'm tampering
Sure.
with to finally get to the mechanism that's going to help the person, imagine what that ends up becoming over the course of whatever, 15, 16 years. And you're
That's right.
training, for me, when I was a trainer for the first 10 years of my career, I was working with I would be training people 10 hours a day at least.
Right.
So I have a lot of experience. I worked a lot as a trainer. And really what got me to arrive at the first four, really actually when I think about it, is just the reward pathways. It's
Right.
kind of like, okay, this person implements this specific intervention
Right.
for their body.
Yep.
Or this aspect of Gait gets incorporated into literally all my sessions for the next week. I'm going to take this one aspect that I discovered of oppositional rotation between the pelvis and the rib cage. Let's see what happens with this person's life. Let me just make sure I find proper implementation. And literally when I implement that idea for the next several years, these people don't have any more pain. So I'm like, okay, well, there's something to that. And what position were you in when that took place? Well, they were standing, they were doing a row. Okay, can I apply this same principle in other aspects?
Sure.
I think about this all the time, and it's the reward that I get for implementing certain interventions that enabled me to understand that the first four was where I needed to go, and just in general, how I train overall.
Right.
It's the fact that I test, I get a result, I retest, and I continue to get the result. I build on that specific hypothesis,
Right.
which then enables me to arrive at a deeper understanding of a more fundamental understanding. It gives me a better understanding of the fundamental nature of movement,
Right.
and then that enables me to to come to better conclusions that help people out.
Right.
I'm not sure if that's making sense or
No,
not.
100%. And I think that's really important because one of the things that you had mentioned previously was the naivety of coming into the fitness industry. And one thing that we talk about tyranny of words a lot, and Stuart Chase has a phrase in Tyranny of Words that is, the map is not the territory.
Yes.
So we say the map is not the territory, and and this is what Naudi's talking about. This is why Naudi hasn't spent a lot of time.
The book is the map.
Exactly.
The book is the map, but
Right.
but the book is not representing what's going on in reality, and that's what you guys should probably think about.
And reality is also like changing all the time, right? So it's like once you write it down, it's already gone.
Like that's a camera that's over there, right?
Right.
But how long is that going to be a camera for?
Exactly.
That's the question. Eventually, it's going to corrode, and all we will call that is just another kind of matter. If it turns into dust or whatever, and it's a million years from now,
Yep.
that is probably going to corrode, and that will no longer be a camera. So that's the whole thing. It's like circumstances are always changing. Even the way that I train clients has had to change, because I remember like back in the day, I could implement stretching with people 15 years ago and it would give them benefits. But if you implement stretching with people these days, the benefits are very short-lived, and then eventually they end up in one of our facilities,
Right.
because people are increasingly becoming hypermobile.
Right.
Through the estrogenation, the hyperestrogenation of people, through chemicals, through value systems.
Yes.
I believe that the hyperestrogenation is leading people to becoming hypermobile. So therefore, the training protocols to account for that hyperestrogenation have to change. And I didn't really begin to realize this probably till about like 2014. And there was a point where I was like, okay, I realized this even sooner. I knew that I felt like back in like probably 2010 that I was like, when I stretch, I'm trying to buy myself time when I work with the client.
Right.
Let's say I implement a certain procedure or a certain intervention and I'm training them, and then they don't give me necessarily the best reaction.
Yeah.
And where they're like, oh, my QL kind of got tight again, or my piriformis syndrome came back, and I'd be like, well, let me stretch out your piriformis a little bit. Let me put you into a pigeon pose kind of stretch, and then I would stretch them out, and they're like, okay, that feels better. In my mind, probably around 2009, 2010, I was thinking, I'm just buying myself time here because I know this doesn't work. The way that this stretch is being implemented is just simply not making sense. So I'm just buying myself time. And so around that time, I was already thinking like, okay, I'm going to have to change my training to account for what's happening in reality, because what's being said in the map, the book, which is telling you this is what you have to look at. This is the map of the cell. This is where the mitochondria are. This is where your mRNA or whatever your RNA is. This is where your DNA is. These are the ribosomes, whatever. It's like that's the map. But that me understanding about the mitochondria and the cell doesn't matter at all in this reality.
When you try to solve the problem.
When you're in the world, you're like, what's happening at the microscopic level doesn't really matter as it relates to what's happening in the macroscopic at the macroscopic level. You get quantum biology people that talk about things at the quantum level, but I'm like, I'm here right now, and it's like there's physical things, and what happens practically is very different than what people are saying as it relates to the maps that they put out.
But that's why also you're talking about Michael Levin and mechanotransduction and the bioelectrics, and that's why this is important, guys, because this is on the cutting edge of, current science, in the sense of what happens at the macro level leads to a mechanical signaling at the micro level. So that's part of why Naudi's talking about that in terms of mechanotransduction, because the goal of health is to be in a regenerative state. So that's why there's that Albert Einstein quote, which is, if I was trying to come up with a solution to a hard problem, I'd spend, a certain amount of
55 minutes. If you give them an hour,
he'll
take 55 minutes to solve it. And 55 minutes to understand the problem, then 5 minutes to solve it.
Exactly. So you have to think about the problem in this way in order to solve the problem, because what is the problem? That's what we're saying. Most of the fitness novelty machine is saying, buy into the short-term vanity metrics, buy into the easy thing that's going to get you out of pain into the short term. It's very typical for the fitness industry to say, no, just do whatever you want, so that way they can placate for audience capture, et cetera, et cetera. What we're saying is, no, don't do that. Keep the long-term objective in mind and take the sustainable perspective and really think about the problem. And then once you're there, then you're going to have more versatility, regeneration, better health.
Yeah, I think it just always comes down to that whole idea of people trusting their sources of information way more than they should. Right. And as wink, wink, the little Pokey thing, I can't get, because it's social media and YouTube, you can't talk about it too much.
Yes.
It's funny, when that first happened, I was like, oh, people are going to realize how little our public figures know.
That's right.
how little people with PhDs and doctorates know.
That's
They're about
right.
to find out. But I had already seen this a long time ago, and I was like, okay, you can't. And it's not like I just had some grand awareness or some grand awakening that enabled me to understand these things.
No.
It's just you trust the information, you quote unquote trust the science
Sure.
yourself, and then you test it on the actual ground floor when you're working with people, and you're like, well, this quote unquote science, it is science. They've conducted science.
Sure.
They've controlled for certain variables.
That's right.
What I would classify as very insignificant variables.
That's right.
They're not significant. What they're doing, it's not that what science, in terms of what people have done as it relates to science, as it relates to stretching, deadlifts, back squats, and whatnot. It's not to say that what they're talking about is completely irrelevant. It's just insignificant. It's not going to make a big enough impact to actually get people to change their problems. And so.
Yes.
When I started thinking about this whole idea of what was going on with the wink, wink, pokey thing,
Yes.
that's where I started seeing that I could see people kind of losing their faith in the established systems as it relates to the medical system, as it relates to big pharma. They have the reliability. I don't want to bash on it because I feel that FP is a part of Western medicine.
Sure.
I think FP is more Westernized than it is Easternized.
Yes.
Despite the fact that it's like I'm kind of in a lotus position, people will think, oh, now he's in a meditative position.
Yeah, right,
or something,
exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily what I'm trying to do here. It's like my legs are short, and I'm like, it's gonna look awkward if I have my little legs over here.
That's an imposition.
So, yes, exactly. So for me, I'm like, I have to adapt to the stimulus or
Yes,
whatever.
yes.
But anyway, the idea is that you can't just trust the sources of information that are presented to you. You have to test them, and then when it doesn't work, you can't just keep forcing the issue, trying to force something that you can't try and fit a square peg into a round hole.
And that's why we're results oriented. That's why instead of kind of catering to or appealing to credentialism, we're saying, hey, listen, this is how this guy looked before, this is how he looks after. You know, this is how they ran before, this is how they run after, right? That's why we're saying that's a scientific approach or a hard science approach to training rather than, okay, this is my imposition based on the research, which only accounts for so many variables in real time. Or it's not accounting for the variables that objectively matter through first principles.
One thing I've definitely noticed in my career, I remember one time I was in Australia because I was running some certifications over there, and we went to this physical therapist guy who kind of like does, he'll do the physical therapy and then he'd have his own training after the fact that would be quote unquote more functional to help the care continue for the clients,
Sure.
and they would pay out of pocket
Sure.
after they would get the therapy. And what was astounding to me at that time, this is I think back in like 2014, was the level of confidence this guy would speak with.
Right.
And I'm not the most confident individual in the world. I'm really not. The reason I'm insecure is because at some point you realize how, like when you get into this enough, you realize how stupid you are.
Sure.
And then you're just like, oh God, I can't be too confident about anything. Yeah. So when people are confident, I'm just like, I don't understand how people attain confidence.
That's right.
I don't get it.
No.
Don't get me wrong, I'm confident within a certain realm, right? If I'm in a group of people that don't know anything at all, and I'm trying to explain something about health, I guess I can sound, I've been in meetings before and I come off as confident, but I don't have a great deal of personal confidence just because I realize how little I know. What was I talking? What was the topic that I was on, bro? I just brain farted.
You were in Australia.
Oh, so yes, I'm with this physical therapist and / trainer, and the level of confidence he spoke on that this exercise does this for this person.
Right.
And when you do this, this helps them with their pack. Look, I have this Pilates reformer here and we do this here and blah, blah, blah. And he was like trying to sell me on everything. And I was like, you think that I'm going to, and so I think he was kind of expecting me to kind of like compete with them. And I was like, for one, I already know I'm better at doing this than you. I know this because if you're that confident, you've never actually been humbled in the training practice.
Right.
You're cut in rhetoric. You're situated in the rhetoric zone where you're trying to convince people of things. Where in my situation, I'm in the problem solving zone where I'm like, oh God, I hope that what I'm teaching right now is actually going to work.
Right.
And so I didn't get into this like conversational battle with them because I'm like, I know what you're doing doesn't work, and I know it's only going to work to a certain degree. And
that's right.
There was a time that I watched this lecture from Jacques Fresco. And what I found that was interesting about it was that he talked about that the way that you eliminate debates, and I think it might be on the Tyranny of Words as well, But the way that you eliminate debates is by engaging in better testing.
Right.
So quite literally, we could have, let's say for example, and this is what we're going to do eventually. In the next 15 years, 20 years, this is probably going to happen. We will be able to just say, hey, look, you do the deadlifts, you do whatever conventional method that you do, and then we're going to do, we could probably do this now. But I want to knock it out of the ballpark when we do it. But you do X intervention, and then we do functional patterns intervention. And when we see a person run twice as fast as what they did before,
right.
And then in this body type, we characterize it like this is an ectomorph. This is an ectomorph at 45 years old. They've both been running. They run very similar times.
Yep.
And then we're like, okay, one is running 50% faster while the other one is running the same speed.
Sure.
That eliminates all debates.
Right.
And so for me, the end result is what's always mattered the most to me.
Yep.
I've always been oriented around, because I saw Jacques Fresco talk about that. We have to allow the testing to determine, or whatever passes the test, to determine what it is that actually is worth doing and what is not worth doing. What ends up getting the result, whatever ends up solving the problem is what we should ultimately be accounting for.
That's what you're talking about with this physical therapist, is that you're not saying, it's not him per se, you're utilitarian. So it's like, well, I just already know that these interventions don't work the way that they work. So you're not trying to just, exactly.
I've tested them.
They've already been tested. So there's not.
But then never mind that. There's a first principle to the technique that they're using.
Even beforehand.
So anytime that you look, when people say, will get upset at the fact that I say, stretching. And look, I don't say this stuff, just so the audience is clear, I don't say these types of things for the sake of just being hyperbolic. I say them because practically speaking, stretching just simply as it's done, for the most part, is not going to give you what you think it's going to give you. Long term, it's going to cause more problems than it's going to solve.
Right.
If some people will get benefits from stretching for a given period of time until they wear off.
Right.
But the whole idea is that when I see people do stretching, and I see the way they go about it, it's like there's an external force that's always putting them into the range of motion.
Right.
That's the first principle. So if I'm bending down like this to stretch my lower back out, or maybe a little bit of my piriformis or whatever, gravity is pushing me down to put me into that position. So therefore, is my fascia going to get a stretch there? Yes. However, that's not how muscles and fascia work with each other. If I, for example, decided to bend my body down like this to stretch my part of my posterior chain, like I'm doing right now, that's different than if I had a pulley that was coming up from the top and I had to resist and I was anchored down, and then I pulled down and I pulled myself into that range of motion.
Right.
One is passive, where gravity is doing the work to push me down, and then the other one, I'm actively using my anterior chain to put me down into that position.
That's right.
The first principle is fundamentally different.
Right.
So when I think about trying to increase range of motion, there should be muscles that drive that range of motion along with gravity. I'm not saying that this is wrong. What I'm saying is that if you do this in isolation with your mobility, which is what everybody does outside of FP from what I've seen, you are going to end up with hypermobility.
That's right.
You are going to end up hypermobile. Your joint, your ligaments are going to get lax. Your tendons are going to become dehydrated. And you're going to deal with a whole onslaught of problems that come from that, because you are not accounting for the way that people have developed their flexibility.
Right.
And so for me, I don't necessarily, when I look at a physical therapist do what they do, it's not that I have to test everything that they do. I just be like, oh, that's the angle you're going at it with. I see what you're doing. I understand what you're doing, but this is the failure in it, because it does not respect physics in this way, this way, this way, this way. This does not respect biological evolution in this way, this way, this way, and it's not accounting for mechanical propulsion in this way, this way, and this way. So it's not like I need to test everything. I don't need to do a deadlift to know that it's not going to work.
That's right.
I can just understand the first principles of the deadlift and say, okay, this is clearly not going to help people because of, I could get into that ultimately, but we can maybe get into that later on down the line. But I don't necessarily have to test every facet to know, because people will be like, well, Naudi, why don't you just do Pilates, or why don't you do yoga? And I've done Pilates and I've done yoga, and I felt bad doing both of them. You could say that it was a bad class or whatever it may be, which is what most people can do, and that could potentially be a relevant position. But I've been around people who are people who have credentials. For one, all kinds of different credentials, all kinds of certifications, degrees and whatnot, who also did yoga, who understood the anatomy, who understood functionality to some degree on a theoretical level. and I still felt like crap doing yoga with them.
Right.
So it's not the credentials didn't save them.
Right.
It's the principles.
It's the principles that just simply
because
don't
now
work.
even when like I like some positions that are similar to yoga, like I'm sure you can get into a way better position using the principles that you know now.
Well, the thing is, I can't get into that position because to reform fascia.
Well, depending on
This
what
is
you're
the
trying
funny
to do.
part,
Yeah,
guys.
sure.
This is the funny part. Because you'll hear, like I saw this one really like big jacked guy talking about that you really can't reform fascia. Because it's like the amount of force you'd have to produce is like impossible. You'd have to have like literally a semi-truck pull with the amount of tensile strength that's there. So I'm like, okay, fair enough. Then why stretch?
Right.
You can't reform fascia, so
Yeah.
why stretch at all?
Right.
That's the question.
Yep.
You can reform fascia. You have to hydrate it in order to
Sure.
reform it. And there's a
Yes.
specific, just the way that they're trying to go about it doesn't do it.
Right.
If you can't reform fascia, then ultimately we wouldn't get the results that we do with the
Right.
clients that we get.
That's
so
right.
there's a way of going about it, but you can't just use brute force to make it happen.
Sure.
So the key point is when you do the flexibility in yoga, you're reforming some of the fascia, but the most dehydrated points, the most locked places aren't really going to actually move. So it's like that's even when people do things like stretching, I think a lot of times they're not even paying attention to the factors that lead. They don't even really know like how little they're changing in their body to begin with.
Right.
And so what was the general idea is that people that I've always been frustrated with is the level of confidence that people have in this industry.
right.
Independent of actually producing worthwhile outcomes that are quantifiably measurable. When I could see somebody's, all we do is we've had people jump higher, run faster, win world championships, people who've had cerebral palsy, reverse certain aspects of their cerebral palsy. We've had people with Parkinson's, MS, not Parkinson's, what's it called? Schizophrenia.
Right.
We've had people who were schizophrenic that started completely like eliminating their schizophrenia, people with Tourette's syndrome, all this stuff has began to get better based upon the way that we implement these procedures. And I will still tell you guys that right now, I'm not the most confident individual. There was a very popular figure, you and I know who he is, who was reaching out and saying, hey man, I'd love to have you guys on the pod. I'd love to train with you guys. And it's like, when I talked to this guy, he was dumbfounded by the fact that I did not sound confident in myself when I would explain all the things that I don't know.
Right.
He was just like what the heck? So you don't even sound like you like you're confident in what you're talking about. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm really not. Don't get me wrong. I feel that what we do is like 40, 50 years ahead of the competition. And if it is 40, 50 years, is because I still feel like many people have conveniently started adopting many of the things that we do at Functional Patterns to try and kind of catch up. But they've reached a plateau, and I think that now it's based upon the technologies that we're working on, now it's going to be 100 years. Unless AI figures it out, it's probably going to be about 100 years before anybody catches what we're doing.
Sure.
With that said, I understand how limited the practice of functional patterns still is and that it still needs to be developed even further. I think it's going to get people to live to 110 years, 120 years pretty comfortably with what we know right now.
Right.
But if I want to get us to about 250, 300, it's going to take a lot more precision than what I have right now at my disposal. So I have to get substantially better than where I'm at. But I don't come off, when people begin to question me on things, they're usually very, very surprised at the fact that I'm like, dude, I'm not that confident by what I do because I'm not that confident because I understand how complicated it is. I understand how chaotic reality is when there is an absence of order. And for me to assume that I can account for that chaos effectively is being extremely arrogant.
Sure.
And so anytime that I see somebody on social media who seems very confident of their assertions, I'm just like, man, that's crazy. I'm confident. That the confidence that I have is that I know people are on the wrong track.
Sure.
I know that they're not looking at the right first principles. That's where my confidence kind of begins and ends.
Sure.
After the actual, we worked yesterday. We did boxing.
Sure.
How potent was the things that I was teaching?
Insane. It was nuts. It was funny because what you were talking about in terms of training clients, us experiencing that was like crazy because originally you were like, yeah, we'll go over a few modules. And I was like, was that a few or was that like 50? You know what I'm saying? For sure. It did not feel like a few. It felt like a lot. And every single person, it was idiosyncratic to that person. So yeah.
Like I said, I worked with 4 of you and I had to utilize different modules to get each one of you to get better drives.
Exactly.
Yeah, we were working boxing, right? And I started doing boxing and martial arts when I was 16. So that was like over 12, 13 years
Before you
ago.
get into that, just so we're clear, are you guys still mostly degenerated?
Oh God, yes.
So quite literally, until the modules make you immediately more regenerative, I don't think it's good enough.
Because you were talking about being confident, right? So it's like you're confident in that you're in the right path, or you're starting to kind of in the right direction of figuring it out. You're not confident that you figure it out.
I feel like I tapped into the same physics that built this building,
right?
And I'm able to apply it to human beings.
That's right.
But my ability to actually
you don't have
build
like
a building,
dominion over it,
to have I don't have dominion over to control over a person's body like I would like to bring about the architecture that I want, to bring about the most beautiful humans that have ever existed.
And the industry generally operates like if they have like almost dominion over like, just eat this diet. Work out so many times a week, these exercises, and then you'll be
or
good.
just position your body this way, and then at that point it's going to figure everything out.
While they're injecting.
Yeah, right.
Or even not even just we could go all across the board. But this is where I've had like a bad reputation with people in my industry, because I look at this and it's like I get angry to disguise my sadness. That's really it. It's my deflection. Otherwise, I'd be crying every day, just going like, this is fucking a horror show most of the time. So I deflect the sadness that I feel to see what's there with anger. And so for me, it's like, I've come to understand, I've come to gather peace with it, because I understand that people don't lead with wisdom, because wisdom is not fun. And I've been a wise person since I was young. I've always led with wisdom, because the wise look at other people in order to learn from their mistakes. The smart tend to look at their own mistakes and learn from their own mistakes. I've always been looking at other people going like, okay, that person's implementing those interventions. How did they work out for them? Well, it doesn't look that great intuitively, so I'm not going to go down that route. Okay, see that? I see how that guy's interacting in his relationships. Not doing that, not doing that, not doing that, not doing that. Okay. So at least I know what not to do. Let me try what to do. And if somebody does happen to demonstrate some level of competence, I will copy what they do. But the key point is I've realized that people don't lead with wisdom. They're reactionary. Instead of proactionary, they're reactionary with the things that they do. They don't tend to like observe their environment as much as I think that they probably should. And I've just come to understand that we are not going to be the people that people are going to lead off with when it comes to their fitness routines. They're going to have to get burned. They're going to have to learn the hard way. And that's just the way that the world is. And so instead of me getting mad at this point, I'm just understanding what our role is. And it's really just to be there to help people when they've hurt themselves. Yeah. But long term, what it's going to be, like not long term, I mean like next 5 years, it's going to quite literally be
they'll
the
be
people,
opting for that first.
They're going to be opting for us first, because we are going to produce the aesthetics, regenerate them at the same time.
And there are people who do that now. And you'd be surprised. In many instances, it's somebody who actually kind of behaved in the same way as you, Naudi. They don't buy into gym culture. They see gym culture and they're kind of confused by it. Yes. You look at that person, and sometimes it's like the non-exerciser is actually
the best.
In many instances fare much better. And like Rodney and I were talking about our previous experience on the podcast that we did with Johnny, and it was like, whoa, there's this guy that I was looking at. Oh, why aren't you squatting? You need to work your legs. This guy's only working his upper body. What an idiot. He should be working his legs for like the most testosterone production and blah, blah, blah. And then a decade later, I have severe lower back problems and can't bend over to pick up a penny off the ground. You know what I'm saying? And it's like that non-exerciser is able to play, non-gym goer, they'll play basketball and whatever and blah, blah, blah. And then I go on the basketball court and play for an hour, and afterwards I'm fucked for 2 days.
Yeah, I coincide with that mindset or that position completely. I've noticed that working with and you've heard this so many times. It's kind of the cliche. It's like you don't want to have to untrain bad habits out of a person.
Exactly.
And it really does apply to the same way, because it's like, and I think this is one thing like that people don't realize. Like, I never liked exercising. I've never been the kind of person where I'm like, oh, I love to go to the gym. I mean, the only thing that I would like about it is that there would be maybe some girls there or something, and it would give me like a little motive to go see some chicks and for me to maybe have a better physique. But I like playing basketball. I like being active. I like going on hikes. I really thoroughly enjoyed that. But going to the gym, I'd be like, oh man, like it's like, I'm a small guy, so as a small guy, you got to have a V-taper if you want to have a semblance of respect in this world as a small person. So essentially, I better culminate a V-taper if I want to be able to succeed in life. Sure. That's just how it is. And so for me, I forced myself to go to the gym to do it, but I never liked it. I always hated it. And I think because of that is a big part of why I've learned what I have, because I wasn't like, until I could make it fun, until I could make it like, it was like, a pleasant experience where I'm like, oh, I'm lubricating my body. I'm like, it's like, oh my resistance training at this point just feels like I go into it like it's just a therapy, like a literal therapy session. I traumatize my body, and I come out of it just like, oh wow, like my joints, I have this new awareness. I feel like I'm actually woke. Like I feel like this is what woke is supposed to be. And I'm like, this just feels amazing. But it took me a very long time to like overcome, like to get to that place. And I found that people who don't exercise, who don't like to exercise, they identify with that a lot more. You know,
right,
we were talking about before we even started this video about how high maintenance it is for people to attain fitness in this world.
Right.
How much they have to work. Like people who take steroids, I don't even like. It's not that I don't look. I'm opposed to taking steroids because taking steroids is just not healthy. It doesn't.
Right.
If the pharmacy is in your brain, the key point is how do you trigger the brain to produce those sets of hormones in order to get whatever you want out of your body or whatever.
Yes.
How do you find the mechanisms within you to trigger the brain to secrete those hormones? So, but in principle, I am against against taking steroids. But who knows? Maybe somebody might find a way of doing it in a sustainable way that's not damaging. I'm open to the idea of that. Maybe you go on an HGH cycle. I thought about this a long time ago. You go on an HGH cycle to grow your bones.
Right.
If you have perfect mechanics and then you take HGH, that might be the way to do it. But I think if you were to attain close to perfect mechanics, you begin to secrete human growth hormone to accommodate those biomechanics, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
But with that said, let's say I don't have a problem with steroids. I do, but let's say I don't have a problem with steroids. And let's just call them exogenous anabolic agents.
Sure.
They're not steroids.
Sure.
Testosterone replacement is an exogenous, that therapy,
yes.
You're taking testosterone exogenously to try and promote anabolism.
That's
and
right.
what I think people need to understand these days, because you hear a lot about sympathetic tone versus parasympathetic tone as it relates to like autonomic arousal.
That's right.
But what people don't oftentimes consider as it relates to this whole thing is that it's very easy to create sympathetic tone, but it's not so easy to create parasympathetic tone.
That's right.
And so what people are trying to do is utilize exogenous agents to trigger the parasympathetic functionality or anabolism, right? So you have catabolism on one side, and then you have anabolism on the other. The process of breaking down is catabolism, and on the opposite side, you have anabolism, which is building back up.
Yes.
Sympathetic is breaking down, parasympathetic is building back up.
That's right.
So the idea is that people are taking exogenous anabolic agents. When you take peptides, when you take sermorelin, that is an exogenous anabolic agent. I just use the term steroids, and people use the term steroids to say you are taking these said substances to account for the fact that you have no idea how to endogenously, without the use of external substances, create anabolism within your system. Is that all kind of registering?
Slow down entropy in your system.
Yes, exactly. So the idea is, the way we go about it is, how do you slow down entropy?
Yep.
How do you reduce chaos in the system and increase better structure?
That relates back to the beginning, which is we can get anybody in the gym anybody who comes in, if you tell them, okay, what do you want me to do on my off days, right? We were talking about that in the beginning. What Naudi's saying is increase your parasympathetic tone, right? But we're not just going to say that to a client. We're saying get sunlight, get grounding, do nothing, tune into the boredom we were saying for a long time, right? Why are we saying that? Because that is one of the most important aspects. That's why you're saying if you could work out for 1 hour a week, then and then build your parasympathetic tone in the meantime, you would think everybody would be thrilled with that, right?
Exactly.
But instead, we call this exercise anxiety, right? Exercise-induced anxiety, right? Which is studied. There is research talking about doing HIIT training and doing marathon training and the anxiety that can induce. And it's most likely because these people are not building enough parasympathetic tone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, that fits into a question.
Hold on, let me finish this topic, because I don't want to break it off, because then we're going to leave it, because this is incredibly important. So we got on this topic of exogenous anabolic agents, right? We got onto that topic, but now I want to get into the topic of high maintenance bodies.
Right.
When you take exogenous anabolic agents, now you have to take blood. Now you have to get blood panels every few weeks, probably every few months. You have to think about, okay, now I have to, if I'm going to get on testosterone replacement, now I have to inject this every few days to keep it in my system. I got to inject myself in the butt with this. I now have to take this supplement, that supplement, that supplement. It's like Now it's like you have to train more to account for the fact that you're now more anabolic. So now you got to be in the gym for longer in order to be able to get the effects from the EAAs. The idea is that when people go down this path of taking all these supplements, which I'm not opposed to supplements. Like I'm okay with certain supplements, but it's like when you go down this path of like having to micromanage every single process with your body, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Totally.
If biology, and Michael Levin talks about this a lot, is like instead of trying to figure out like through Neuralink the way that the brain should interface with the body, you study biology and then you reverse engineer understanding how it works, and then you let the biology take over when you understand it well enough. So it's kind of like knowing how to lead a dog down a room or whatever with a treat, right? Yeah. So it's like if you can lead the biology is way more intelligent than we are. It already has its intrinsic intelligence. So for me, it just comes down to that if I can tap into that intelligence, ultimately, the way that I see it, now I don't have to, now I have more free time to do what? To think higher, to become more woke, like actually woke.
To innovate, to just make society better.
And quite literally, that's why I'm able to do it, because literally, if most people would be shocked to understand, I'm actually working out about like 12 hours a day, but I'm just working out up here and I'm forecasting situations. I have to forecast as a CEO. I have to forecast where we put our money, where the investments are going to go, what technologies are going to be the ones that come up next, and which ones come in 3-4 years, which ones come next year. I have to and then I have to think about allocating budgets for that. When do we possibly become an IPO?
Yep.
As a CEO, I have to think about all of these things. Be like, okay, if we're going to turn FP into an IPO, how much infrastructure needs to be backed so that when we get when we actually get valuated on the stock market, people are going to want to put money into it because there's amazing technology built into the company.
Right.
So I have to think about all these things. So quite literally, my life is just constant exercise, and I do it and I'm able to do that because I'm not having to do so much stuff.
Yeah.
Like I just think about how many people are like, you know what, Naudi, I just want a routine. Give me a daily routine that I could work on for an hour a day, and I'm like, you want to spend just so I can help my mobility. Give me 45 minutes to do that, and then I'm like, okay. Then they'd be like, what are you going to do for your balance? What are you going to do for your agility? What are you going to do for your core strength? What are you going to do for your leg strength, for your upper body strength? What if you just got really good at your gait cycle? Well, actually, you would get good at all of those things. Yep. If you could literally just sprint perfectly, quite literally, your exercise would probably consist of about 30 minutes at most per day or per week. You'd probably be spending 30 minutes per most, and you'd look like Michael Johnson or kind of like Usain Bolt if you could have perfect running mechanics. So for me, I just think about it from the vantage point of like, I'm extremely lazy. To go back on that topic about clients that they don't have any experience exercising.
Yes.
I'm extremely lazy, as are my clients, and that's how I like them to be.
Right.
I want them to be lazy. Don't get me wrong. I want them to be physically lazy, but I want them to be very mentally engaged.
Yes.
And if they're very mentally engaged, then that gives me an opportunity to help them figure out more of their problems.
That's right.
But when you're dealing with the chronic exerciser, right? So I guess I'm not sure if that's a term to use, but it's somebody who's dealing with an issue of just creating chronic conditions by excessively exercising.
Yes.
Most of the problem ends up becoming trying to convince them to be like, hey man, like turn this into a low maintenance process for you.
Right.
Make this low maintenance so you can actually get to live life a little bit and like explore what's going on in your head, explore what's going on in reality, and embrace the complex nature of it. And quite literally, the way that I think about it is like, more structure typically leads to better outcomes.
Yeah.
Why is there so much crime in civilization?
Because of a lack of relevant structure.
There's a lack of.
There has to be. That's kind of that was Jacques Fresco's vision.
If we can have the structure of the prison system, to actually rehabilitate people
and being proactive,
and it would cost $15,000 a year or $10,000 a year because you had like more efficiency built into the prison system.
Yes.
Then guess what? We would have less criminality, and we would have people coming out of the prison system becoming very, very good workers who would be able to help prop up the system. Right. So quite literally, it just boils down to that. The more that we organize, right, the more that we create order in things by having better structure in the system, the more that we address the chaos, and the better the civilization is going to be. Well, guess how it actually works inside of the body? the exact same way. It scales down and up.
Yep.
It happens at the subatomic scale, and guess what? It also happens at the macro scales. And that's
right.
what I think we're going through that process right now.
Yeah.
I think the universe is structuring us. We're not structuring ourselves. I believe there are physical forces in reality that tell us to behave in certain ways.
That's
and
right.
that we are being structured in a particular fashion. And so to go back to this whole thing, when you give in to natural law, when you give in to the rules of reality, to the simulator that we're living in, and you don't impose your beliefs onto reality, but instead allow reality to impose its forces upon you, and then you adjust to them, that gives you the capacity to actually, what I classify, self-actualize.
Right.
And what I would say is self-actualizing is just becoming part of the emergent system that is the universe.
That's right.
That's what I see it as. And so it's that to me describes the beauty. I've experienced it in given moments when I'm tampering with some of the technologies that we have in Brazil at the moment, and I feel it, and I'm like, holy shit, this is the most, I've taken psychedelics, and this surpasses it 1,000,000 times over. There's no anxiety. I get done with it, and I'm just dumbfounded by what it feels like to connect to this thing, and to do it without having to take anything is beyond amazing. And so for me, that's what my existence is ultimately about, is so ultimately, it's not even, I feel like so many times people are thinking about how do I manage my anxiety by doing something. Eventually there comes a point where you don't think that way, and you're like, I'm living in this moment right now.
Yep.
And it's like gratitude doesn't become a practice. It becomes a mode of operation.
Yes.
It becomes an automatic.
Yes.
And so for me, every day that I wake up, I'm like, it's not like I have to sit there and say, man, I'm so grateful. I just live that way by the efforts that I put forth, by how ham I go at trying to figure out my structure.
Right.
When you embrace that, it's the most inspiring thing that you could possibly have. And when you feel it, I'm sure you guys feel it as well. When you feel it, it's impossible not to fucking understand it and say, well, this is what I want to do more than anything.
Yeah, and it's being prompted by structure, but you trying to fix, like your body's changing as you're doing this.
Like, think about it. What is anxiety? Isn't it trying to just micromanage your problems in life?
Right.
It's over.
Yeah, well,
overthinking.
it's like revving your engine, but actually accomplishing nothing.
But you're
trying to
just
control.
focused,
Yeah, you're
trying to
controlling.
control variables, but the
controlling
problem
reality,
is,
yeah.
how many variables can you control for consciously?
Right.
When you walk, how many processes are going on simultaneously?
That's right.
Billions, trillions,
Yeah,
hundreds
right.
of trillions?
Yeah.
Probably, if you think about how much cellular communication is going on amongst
Yes.
trillions
Yeah,
of cells
impossible
and
to-
bacteria, right? How are you going to be able to micromanage all of that? That's where Dr. Michael Levin gets it right.
He's talking
It's like-
about intelligent groups, in other words, your cells, et cetera, and then those create an intelligent group, and then it scales up to like human civilization, essentially.
Did you want to bring up what this individual brought up on Instagram?
That fits in really well actually with the current topic.
Awesome.
Movement for Air says, can you guys discuss how FP addresses the nervous system, generally speaking?
Just stop separating it as if it's a separate
Yes,
thing
as a
from
separate
everything
thing.
else.
Tyranny of Words. Read Tyranny of Words if you want to
Can
understand
you
your
rephrase the
relationship.
question for the mic, for the video?
Oh, yeah. What was it again? I'm sorry.
How does FP repair the nervous system?
How does it
Address
address the nervous system? So, like, for example, when we're helping people with neurodegenerative disorders, right? One thing I want to talk about just real quick, too, is there's another Fresco concept in terms of tyranny of words, et cetera, et cetera. I think what Naudi's talking about, too, relates to the fact that Fresco has said this before in terms of you can't study the brain. You can study the characteristics of the brain in relation to its environment.
The brain is a responding mechanism.
Exactly. The brain is a responding mechanism. So and therefore you can extrapolate that the human is a responding mechanism. So if you want to talk about the nervous system, you have to talk about how your nervous system is relating to its environment, which when you're talking about abstractions, when you're talking about, if you have an objective sense of what is actually there as opposed to imposing upon it, then you typically get a reduction in anxiety, et cetera. And people who do like the NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming, stuff like that, like they've talked about this before, but then if you don't take structure into account, then you end up with minimal results.
Yeah, you're relating to
Absolutely.
gravity.
Say it again.
You're changing the relationship to gravity.
So what you guys are talking about is responding to actual things, not responding to things that we make up in our head.
Right.
That's why I'm not a big guy that's always talking about God.
Yes.
I'm not a big guy that's like super passionate about like the last movie that I watched that was super fictional. I'm not the kind of guy that's like, hey, let me try and recreate a situation that happened in a movie.
Yep.
Because those things are fake. They're not real.
Yep.
For me, I spend my time thinking about, look, reality is structured. There's a structure to the universe. We just don't understand it. And the idea, the purpose is to unify with the structure of the universe. That's what makes it, that's what the truth ultimately is. It's trying to get to the fundamental nature of understanding why reality works.
It's regression and progression analysis.
Connecting to it.
Once again.
Yeah, connecting to more order. And we were talking at the beginning with the niche systems. It's like they're operating from like connecting to entropy. So when people engage in these things, because there's no structure with what they do, they're basically just trying to.
They're entropic organisms, and they're just trying. They're associatively entropic, and they are just essentially compounding the entropy.
And they end up operating from like profit first instead of like actually like helping people, because they're not. Well,
let's stay on the topic of the nervous system, because that's the question that they ask. So quite literally, the brain is a responding mechanism, and quite literally, if the tyranny of words is so important for this, because it pretty much tells you that if you want to actually attain real sanity, what I would classify as sanity as well, that you need to actually respond to things that exist, right? So quite literally, like, I don't have discussions about like whether there's a correct socialism or not a right socialism, because we invented that. You can, there's a social organization that we ultimately have to have, but if you really want to talk about economics, the only one that really makes sense to me is resource-based economics.
Yes.
That's the one that makes the most sense. You either go capitalism or you go resource-based economics.
Yep.
You have to have some, I feel like socialism is like playing on resource-based economics to some degree or the other. But like, I don't engage in discussions about love, because love, everybody has a different interpretation on love. I don't engage in discussions about God, because everybody has different discussions about what God is, what spirituality is. People, so quite literally, what I tend to find that destroys the nervous system and people's brains more than anything is when they begin to engage in things that don't actually solve the problem. Like my dog, for example. All I need to do with my dog is just take it outside to run. And then you saw that I took it outside. It's very orderly in the way that I set it up. And then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, it's done. And then we go somewhere, and then it still wants to keep moving around. And so guess what? I have to repeatedly tell the dog for about 5 to 10 minutes to sit down. And then it'll want to get back up and start moving around and becoming chaotic again, and go start moving around randomly, apparently. And then I'll say, no, down, sit down. And then it'll sit down. And then it'll want to get up again. I'm like, nope, down. And then eventually it's like, I'll start hearing my dog snore.
And parasympathetic tone.
So quite literally, my dog doesn't need to extrapolate whether God exists or not.
In order to achieve that state.
And it functions just fine. He functions great. His digestion works great. He's never irritable. He is never irritable. Maybe every once in a while he might be like, oh, I'm kind of depressed or whatever. But my dog is always just super sweet, just a complete sweetheart. I just get many feel-good hormones thinking about that existing thing that is my dog. But it never contemplates God. It never contemplates love. It never contemplates any of those things. Because it's nature has never taken on pointless abstractions prior to humans. It has just been responding to physics. It's been responding to the physical forces that exist in the environment. That's what nature ultimately...
And that's what you're talking about, being a responder, which is part of why we're doing this podcast, because that's why we went through, okay, here's Naudi's journey, figuring out these observations, et cetera. He's responding to the environment. And when you understand that, coming from Tyranny of Words, Jacques Fresco, how did all of these principles end up with the first principles kind of mindset framework of FP? So what Naudi just did there, he literally went through each order of magnitude of abstraction. It literally, you could go in that order. It's like things like God and the divine, the universe, blah, 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 blah. You could go to things like love, etc., like emotionalism. It's kind of like there's a lot to be left up to interpretation there. You can't get everyone on the same page with that. Then we can get into kind of like social hierarchies in terms of socialism, communism, etc. So what we're saying is then we're like, oh, we have a chair, right? We have,
Or hold on, I'm going to interject because this is really important. Look, if you want to repair your nervous system, learn to run properly, because the way that you establish your nervous system was through Gait. Like most of the functions that your brain are actually there to do are actually oriented around movement. So if you move correctly, you're already going to address the nervous system. So the aim is have optimal biomechanics, and you already addressed that. But let's talk about the difference between social validation and natural validation. Right? This is one thing that I think people don't aim to really think about too much. When you think of a top G in our social hierarchy, you think of somebody like Andrew Tate, who has done some very questionable things that I don't agree with at all.
Yeah.
Whether he's a criminal or not, I don't know. I just don't know. I don't have a lot that I say on it.
Sure.
I'll just say that many of the things that he's done are extremely questionable,
Sure.
and I don't agree with them. And with that in mind, he's socially validated. But he has a habit of, I think, drinking, coffee and smoking cigars, like I think 12 cups of coffee is what he said, and he smokes several cigars throughout the day. He's socially validated, but naturally speaking, it's like he still needs to utilize these exogenous substances in order to keep going, so to speak, or whatever.
Plus, he's a kickboxing champion, so how would his biomechanical resilience be to things like that if he weren't that? You know what I mean?
But let me put it this way. Let's say he is a top G, but what ends up happening to these top Gs as they age is that they're still going to age, they're going to be in pain,
Sure.
They're going to be struggling with it because they're not necessarily concerned about the actual matrix.
Yes.
Like I'm concerned about actually connecting to the matrix.
Yes.
So how do I infuse with the matrix? There's a social matrix, right? Which is filled with nonsensical abstractions.
That's like the woke mind virus, etc.
That or the conservative mind
There you go,
virus
sure.
as well.
Yes,
so it's like
of
you have
course,
them
of
both. It's
course.
just the mind virus of non-referential abstractions.
Exactly.
If you haven't read the Tyranny of Words, I would suggest that you read the Tyranny of Words so you can understand what I'm talking about. But there's a woke mind virus. There's the mind virus of metaphysics. And everything that builds off of metaphysics is the ultimate mind virus. So you have physics and then you have metaphysics. I think that metaphysics, for the most part, if not completely useless, there's some utility to philosophy, but overall, as it relates to the practical application of philosophy, it's mostly a waste of time.
Yep.
Maybe what you could say is what I'm talking about right now is philosophical as well. But the key point is that you could be the top G. You could be, let's say, for example, you could be Jeff Bezos, and he has hundreds of billions of dollars, and what does he look like? He still has to use the same therapies as
That's
somebody
right.
who makes $150,000 a year if they want to use testosterone replacement.
That's right.
So quite literally, it's like, is Jeff Bezos becoming any more naturally validated by climbing the social hierarchy ladder?
No.
So that's the whole thing. If you want to repair your nervous system, what you have to start thinking about is natural validation. If you actually want to do it. And the thing is, most people just want to see me as an exercise guy and they don't want to take it any further than that,
Sure.
which is completely fine.
Yeah, I remember in the past you were talking about the selfies, and that was like,
Yeah, and people used to get mad at me when I would
Really
talk
mad.
about like taking selfies.
Sure.
People would be like, God, you're such a buzzkill. And that's another thing I guess I could get into. It's like, unfortunately, if you want to repair your nervous system, you have to damage your nervous system by being a buzzkill to people a lot of times.
Yeah.
And then you have to kind of become somewhat of a recluse to get away from people because when you're around them, that's going to destroy your nervous system because they just have so many bad habits they just don't want to address.
Yep.
And so until the civilization figures that out, I think a lot of times socializing isn't even necessarily a good thing for most people, which is another topic we could get into another time.
for sure the amount that people want to socialize. At
Yeah,
the very
well-
least.
People are generally
you know what? Let's get into
over-socialized.
socializing. Why did socializing even begin amongst animals? Why do
Oh, right.
do cells socialize?
To
Do they communicate?
produce, to
Do cells communicate with each
Yeah,
other?
they certainly do.
And to fulfill a certain function.
That's right.
To attain a specific kind
Yes.
of goal, and most
Yes.
of the time it's functional.
achieve a
Yes.
goal, yes.
Why did humans begin to communicate in the way that they did in nature?
Same reason.
It was initially functional. Where's the water? Where's food? How do we build this? If we do it together, it happens faster. So let's communicate.
If
on
I have
that.
a job, am I socializing?
Yes.
Right, of course.
So for me, when I think about socializing, it's like I like to socialize on solving problems because guess how the brain orients socializing?
Sure.
Solving a problem. But recently we've tried to turn socializing into escapism.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm just saying, like, when I was a trainer and I was the lone kook behaving the way that I do and thinking the ways that I did, because very few people could really connect with the ways that I thought, I was by myself a whole great deal. But I didn't feel lonely. You want to know why? Why do you think?
Because you were doing something. You were like producing or
No, because I had clients. And I got to
Right,
socialize
yeah.
with them every single day.
Yeah, right.
In fact, it was the most amazing experience of my entire life. I asked myself, why did I even create? If it wasn't for the technologies that we're going to develop,
Sure.
I would not even consider wanting to go down this path ever again in my
Sure,
entire life.
sure.
But I think about all the amazing experiences that I had with amazing people and that I got to help them alleviate their suffering.
Sure.
What could be fucking better than that? There is nothing. That is the actual pinnacle of it all.
Yep.
It's like when you get to communicate to help somebody. So for me as a trainer, when I'm at work, I get to talk to people all day. And so then when I get done with being at work, guess what I do? I go home and I get to stay quiet and I get to chill. Recover. And then I get to go the next day and do that. I think if many people could repair their nervous system, if they could take that attitude with whatever job that they have. Because if you get to spend time talking to people at work and engaging with them and like talking to people, you're socializing. It's just drinking a beer and socializing. I think you almost have to drink a beer and socialize if you're going to do it. Why?
Sure.
Because intrinsically you understand you're doing something you're not supposed to, which is just socialize for socializing's sake. And you're like, I better drink something. I better smoke some weed to let down the anxiety. Because why am I here? What am I really here to do when it comes to socializing? Evolutionarily, I'm here to communicate to accomplish a goal, a functional goal. Yeah. And people have turned socializing.
Yeah, the whole small talk thing. It's like it's just an awkward like.
And that's
it also becomes a game of social hierarchies and gossip and things like that, which is not
unfortunate.
Functional.
It's saddening.
Yeah,
like that is just saddening. The fact that we're just so apt to want to either make poor or rich people or black people or women or men or whatever it may be or brown people the enemy instead of just like saying, okay, like what's structurally going wrong with the world to where it makes some people have and some people have not.
Right.
Why is it so awkward for me to say the things that I say many times? Because it just takes the advantage away from people who kind of feed on the negligence, on the ignorance in many regards. And so it's like, and a lot of times it's, you have people that are engaged in misinformation and they have like legitimate, like they're legitimately trying to bring about like relevant info into the society. But then you have people that are disinformationists who are literally, they know that they're doing something wrong and they're like, whatever, I'll still push it out there just for the sake of like building myself up on the hierarchy.
Right.
So speaking of this whole thing about repairing the nervous system, it's just kind of like, until you can like filter that out, I don't think you can actually repair it. And I feel like in many regards, I've repaired some aspects of my nervous system. It's still highly broken. I still like break out in sweats whenever I speak in public. And that's like, I'm very introverted. So this is not comfortable for me to do. The level I hate getting in front of a camera, I can't even put into like words. The fact that I even became a public figure was like, I'm great one-on-one. I'm great I'm great one-on-one with people. I don't get nervous when I'm one-on-one, but you put me in front of a crowd when I'm running my courses, I had to step away from it because it's like, for one, my responsibilities as a CEO have taken me away from it. But ultimately, I think within time, I should be able to get comfortable speaking in front of people and becoming a public figure, but I still have to do nervous system repair. I'm in the process of repairing my nervous system. But with that said, I don't have any like real anxieties. I've had money since about like 2014, 2015. I've had more money than I could care to want to spend for like the last 10 years of my life. So in the midst of all that, I've been trying to figure out like what the hell my neuroticisms are, what my anxieties are. And I think in many regards, I've overcome that. I don't spend my time wallowing on anything in the past. I don't spend my time worrying. I don't worry anymore. I'm kind of done with worrying. I'm just like, so I feel like I figured a lot of those things out. But I think really to go back to the topic of repairing your nervous system or how to address your nervous system, it comes down to like understanding how reality actually works. Like what the actual problems is, understanding attribution. What do you attribute the success of something to versus the failure of something to?
Yes.
It's like attribution is humongous. And I think that people don't even know what that term means. I learned that as a marketing term because you have to think about, okay, where am I making my sales?
Right.
What within my marketing, what within our marketing budget is actually yielding the return? What audiences are the ones that we need to try and capture or speak to? What's the message that seems to actually resonate with people to get them to want to buy and invest into functional patterns? These are the types of things that I have to think about a lot, and marketing is kind of like what's enabled me to think about that term attribution. But most of the time when people think about what prompts success, they don't even know. I don't think most people really understand what drives the failures and the successes of what happened in life. I think they just think that things kind of happen. They'll say, it's the politicians' fault.
Right.
You've heard that song, Rich Men, North of Richmond.
That's right.
And he's blaming politicians.
Right.
But is it really the politicians, or is it really the fact that we're just not very well organized?
Sure.
Is it the fact that we're maybe just not very well structured in our brains? We value stupid things.
Sure.
And when you value stupid things, you end up with stupid outcomes. Mm-hmm. And the stupid outcomes are not necessarily favorable. Maybe it's time that we spend less time poking at each other and judging each other, and instead judging the structural scenarios that bring about dysfunctional behaviors.
Right.
Perhaps that might be the route. I know that's the most unpopular way to view life. I'm not going to get like 1 million followers from saying that, but that's actually how it is. And unfortunately, that's why I told you guys before, I've come to make peace with the idea that people are just probably not going to understand that for a very long period of time.
Right.
Because I'm not sure if they'll ever be ready for it, because we're still very much in kind of like this childish blame game.
Yes.
That we're in. We're just constantly blaming each other, blaming. It's not good for the nervous system. So if you want to have a good functioning nervous system, learn attribution. Think about that term, attribution. If Usain Bolt runs really, really fast, it's not because he was doing deadlifts. It's not because he was doing back squats.
Right.
It's not because he was doing traditional weight training. There are other factors that you could attribute his successes to, right?
Totally.
It's like if I work with Kyle Dake, which I did, it's like, was Kyle Dake a great wrestler because of functional patterns? No. Kyle Dake was a great wrestler independent of functional patterns. Did Kyle Dake succeed because of functional patterns? No, not just because of functional patterns, it's because of Kyle Dake. But could Kyle Dake have succeeded if functional patterns didn't come into his life to modify his style the way that I implemented it, to make the mechanical changes that we did, to completely reconfigure the way that he did everything he did? No way in hell would he have been able to figure any of that stuff out. So you can attribute that success with functional patterns because there was a complete change in the way that he did everything after the fact. So you can so I can attribute that to it. So for me, when I work with athletes, I don't work with most athletes because I'm like, well, if this guy's going to succeed independent of me anyway, why do I care to want to work with them? To cloud chase?
Sure.
I'm good. I'd rather work with somebody who's an underdog like Johnny Eblin, who doesn't appear to have be the most genetically gifted, and see if I can build him up. Because for me, for one, I'm an underdog. And I am going to cater to who? I'm biased to my archetype as the underdog. And so I'm going to want to cater to whoever the underdog is. And so for me, when I think about that term attribution, people they attribute all kinds of crazy things. It'd be like, Mark Hall is strong because of deadlifts and powerlifting. I'm like, no. I'm like,
yeah, that is a good example.
Liver King. Like,
I mean,
Mark Hall would be strong independent of deadlifts. Because of his genetic blueprint.
That's right.
If you look at the Liver King, people attributed his success to the 9 ancestral tenets. Many people bought into it, and they were surprised by the fact that he got caught with steroids. I'm like, come on.
Which is crazy.
What do you attribute his successes to? One, he's a mesomorph who's already muscle bound. And then number 2, he's on the most designer steroids you could possibly consider to be on. And that's why he's there. People just have issues with being able to extrapolate data.
That's right.
That's the issue. So unfortunately, it takes talent to do that. My job is to try and increase talent in order to be able to become better make people better at extrapolating data. And when they do that, people have issues with their problems with their nervous system because they don't know how to assess what's going on in reality. They don't know. They don't know how to determine when a lion is 5 feet in front of them versus 5 miles down the road.
That's right.
They're discombobulated. And so when you're not sure when a threat is actually imminent from when it's not, your nervous system is always going to be excited.
That's right.
And then you're going to overthink. You're going to tend to think impulsively and erratically. And then at that point, your nervous system is going to get damaged because of that. So that's I'm glad that you brought that conversation up. It just opened up a whole can of worms. But as it relates to the nervous system, it's like, I guess the word I would use, and I'm going to use the word in order to explain what I'm talking about, but you need to learn to be more intelligent. That's the way I think you fundamentally create a better nervous system. And the way that you become more intelligent is understand what you attribute your successes and your failures to.
Right.
If you can attribute what actually made you successful, not praying to God. Praying to God did not make you successful. And there's people in the fitness industry right now saying, I have a healthy relationship with prayer. I'm like, so, the Aztecs had this quote unquote healthy relationship with killing people. And then sacrificing them so then God wouldn't punish them, right? So human sacrifices. People had, like during the bubonic plague, they had this healthy relationship with prayer. And then the bubonic plague wiped out almost half the population of Europe. There was... It's like there was this healthy relationship of prayer. They attribute that God did it or their lucky rabbit's foot did it, but they can't attribute that, the reason that I found success could have just been dumb luck in some situations. Why did I get lucky? Or sometimes it'll be like, I created my luck by doing this, 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 and this. That's the most effective way of addressing your nervous system. But you might do that with business. You might do that with business and be like, I made the right business moves. But do these business people oftentimes think in terms of, okay, well, I wired my nervous system to be very good for responding to business matters. But do they figure that out with their bodies?
Exactly. It's like attribution. It's like they're very good at saying I remember we had a conversation one time where we were talking about actually exogenous anabolic agents, and it's like, well, if in business you can't cheat it, in business you have to make the right decisions to get to a certain point. Like everybody would, for the most part, agree. You have to be smart with your resources. You have to be good at attribution. Where am I getting the ROI? And then in fitness, it's like, well, no, you can just do these linear solutions and you can eat what you want and just move and don't think about attribute to what is actually creating your success, and then you'll be completely fine. You have to think about what behaviors are actually objectively bringing you closer to that level of success and health.
Absolutely. That makes complete sense. He nailed it completely. But that's the whole thing, is not to be so naive into just thinking that things are going to...
It's the naivety, yeah.
And then never mind. There's so many times, and it's not to bag on chiropractic because it's a good practice.
Sure.
It has its functionality to it. I don't think you should always force cavitations to happen on the body, but it has its contextual utility. But a lot of times they're almost like overly hopeful as to what these adjustments are going to do for a person's nervous system, right? They just assume that the body has this intelligence, and that it's always going to lean towards the right way if you just force it to be in this set alignment, or you cavitate this joint and you create the stimulus, and then it just triggers regeneration.
Yeah.
It's kind of like there's this naivety that takes place. The body does have an intelligence.
Sure.
However, the body also does tend to ossify. Right? I think ossification and entropy go hand in hand.
Sure.
And I also think that negentropy, which is the opposite of entropy, and resorption go hand in hand with each other.
Yep.
When you're asleep, do you go through ossification or do you go through resorption? What would you guys guess?
Resorption.
You're going through resorption when you're asleep. The idea is turning bone fragments or like I think calcium deposits, and then turning them into things that have more water in them. I guess that's what it would be, right? Muscle cells, fascial cells, or whatever. I think it ultimately comes down to trying to make your body more fluid altogether. So the body, just like the body has an intelligence, it also has a propensity to become disordered because we die. We age, and if you age, the older you get, the more disordered you become.
And as you said, disorder is much easier than order. So it would be naive to assume that, oh, if I just do this linear intervention, I'm going to get more order and better structure, et cetera. It's more complicated than that, is what we're saying.
I'll just tell the audience this too. It's not fun to have to be this guy,
right?
Because what we're talking about is like the buzzkill of all buzzkills.
Yes.
Because quite literally, it's saying like that magic rabbit foot is not giving you more order.
Well, imagine from a business perspective, it's much easier to say, hey, I'm going to sell you entertainment or candy or whatever, you know what I'm saying, or things that you can consume that give you short-term gratification. Imagine from a business perspective how difficult it is to sell something where it's like, no, you need to change your behavior. You shouldn't be buying into escapism. You need to sit down and tune into the boredom. Tune into the boredom? Who wants to do that? Who wants to buy a product that's going to make you do that and then pay? You're going to pay me to tell you to not do this stuff. I mean, come on. Do you think this guy wants to be in that position? So that's that's why we're doing this, because these are the stuff that people not only in the fitness industry, but we also get a lot of comments that talk about the adversarial approach to the way that functional patterns communicates, quote unquote.
Well, clearly we've thought things out pretty far through. I think the results kind of speak for themselves. And honestly, we've already made it this long without having to talk about them too much. And I'd rather not even get into it. I'll just say, I guess I just like talking about the things that we talk about. It relaxes me, man. And it's actually therapeutic to do that. And I feel like we've done that so far in this podcast. But I think the main thing is that order breeds from chaos, but it doesn't just happen miraculously, magically. Biology had to use immense levels of intelligence to figure that out. And if you want to solve your problem, why is it when people say that civilization is falling apart or that America is falling apart, what are they really saying?
They're saying it's becoming disordered.
We're losing our structural integrity.
Right, exactly.
That's really what it is. We need to get more structural integrity. And the question is, how are we going to do that? That's the question. Well, we have to be actively engaged in the process of building more structural integrity. We have to think about creating order. And as it relates to our body, it's how do we develop more neg entropy.
That's
How do we
right.
develop more resorption?
And in
Functional
order to do
resorption,
that,
too.
we need the correct attribution and reference points. So once again, tyranny of words, you can't, and Naval Noah Harari talks about this a little bit as well. We have a tendency to unite around stories, and then those stories are typically abstract oriented, one nation under God, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, oh, that's breaking down over the course of 200 and some odd years, right? Wow, what a surprise. You know what I mean? So,
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, because this whole notion of the stories makes it so hard. And that's part of the reason why I've gotten off of social media entirely. I mean, I'm on YouTube, so I'm always
Sure.
watching YouTube videos on
Yeah.
all kinds of different stuff.
Yeah.
But I've gotten off of social media because it's like, if you try playing that game, and we're playing that game and we're doing pretty well with it. I mean, we had a post that we put up that got like 9,000 likes where we said the deadlift wasn't actually the king of all exercises.
Sure.
I said that back in 2011, 2012.
Yes, the
and
message
people-
is congruent.
Oh!
It's the same.
Yeah, people have torn me up. They used to
Yeah.
tear me apart for that 10 years ago.
Sure.
But now it's like we got like, there was hundreds of thousands of people who watched that. And then they click like on it, and we got massive amounts of support for it. Mind-boggling to me to even think about. Why did I bring that up? What prompted me to bring it up? Because you mentioned something. What was it?
Oh, I was
just
talking
brain
about
farted.
the structure
stories.
stories.
So we're doing really well as it relates to the narrative battles.
Right.
But I don't think that we're really going to win this until we develop better technology.
Sure.
And that's really what my job is here. It's like, fortunately, I don't like being this guy, and I don't have to be this guy.
Right.
Because if I can make technologies that make people move better, and I say you could still eat grains, you can still, well, if you want to eat ice cream, just so the audience knows, like we eat ice cream, and it's fine. I don't consider ice cream a junk food. Obviously, if you consume too much of it, it's damaging.
Yes.
But overall, it's like I don't think ice cream is a junk food. But let's say if you want to eat pizza or whatever, I'm assuming. Let me put it this way: I think if you could move impeccably with great mechanics, your body is not going to want to crave crap.
Sure.
It will just be like, in order for this body to, like, if I create better structure in my body, automatically my body's going to say, well, if we have better structure, automatically now I need nutrients in order to function. Otherwise, this can't work. So ultimately, you stop eating junk food because your body can't live off of crap when it's a finely tuned machine. Like, you can't expect a Lamborghini to run really, really well if you're putting like half water, half gas in the tank.
Right.
It's like there needs to actually be fuel there that the Lamborghini can burn for it to drive, right? So
Lamborghini, Ferrari, but the Lexus that my girlfriend drives literally needs a higher grade gas rather than a lower grade gas.
Exactly. So there you go.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. So the idea is that as you up your structure, as you up your neg entropy, the fuel that you have to put into your body won't give you the option to eat crap anymore. Right. And this is often, people try forcing nutritional protocols onto their life.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I'm like, you need to arrive at a nutritional protocol.
Sure.
Which I think is extremely important as it relates to figuring your body out, because it's like, if you move well, if you move great, and your body is structured where it's supposed to, and you have more muscles on your body, and you want to be able to retain your function, your fascia is going to signal to you, like if you want to feel good, you're not going to be able to eat crap food eventually.
Right.
Like, I can only dabble in eating pizza so much before my body's like, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
And because it's not because I feel sick, it's just more like, this is just pointless, and I'm a machine. And since I'm a machine, I want fuel, and I don't want garbage.
Right.
I want fuel. So quite literally, it's like, I think within time, the technology is going to develop to such a degree that I won't have to convince anybody of anything about what they need to do with their training. It's just, it's going to be so evident to them that this just works way better.
Yeah.
And they're going to be like, all right, well, you know what? Like, I'm just going to follow through with whatever you say. And then we won't have to fight these narrative battles anymore.
Right.
So quite literally, we have a whole team. You guys are part of that team as it relates to dealing with the narratives in terms of keeping morale high within people that are in FP.
Sure.
There's a whole team that's involved with this. Unfortunately, I get to kind of like lean on that team and have you guys like help me out, deal with this type of stuff. And so because of that, it gives me the opportunity to be more creative. And the other creative team, the engineers that we have that are helping us with things, they get to be more creative. And then that ends up leading to more innovation, which then is going to, it's kind of like if you have a steam engine, right? If you're using a steam engine to propel a boat or a ship or something like that, and you use the best narrative to say that the steam engine is the better engine or whatever, and then we have a nuclear powered ship.
Yeah.
That lasts 40 years, and it'll just keep running, and you never have to fill it with any Obviously, you got to worry about radioactive waste, but you also have to, with steam engines, you have to worry about burning coal, which also isn't good. So, could be perceived as even more damaging than having a boat run on nuclear power.
Right.
But which one's going to win out in the end?
The nuclear power.
And that's what that's always been my bet from the very. So let me put it this way: I operate from a people first perspective as it relates to if functional patterns becomes a net neutral company and it's helping people, that company will continue to keep staying intact, right? I think that there's a lot of people in this industry that see the fitness, that are in this industry who see people as like, they're expendable in many regards. If the profit goes first and if it just so happens to kind of help a few people, they're satisfied with that. But I don't operate under this perspective that we should think about helping people because I'm a good person. I just think that that's the way that ends up working out best in the end. I think the one that works out the best is the one that serves people the most.
That's right.
So I don't see myself as a good guy, as a good dude. I just think of, okay, if this is a math equation, how are you going to have less, which one's going to give you less remainders? Screwing people over or significantly altering their biochemistry and biology to achieve some of the most blissful states they could ever imagine?
If you want more order for yourself, you're going to put that on, or you're going to try to make more order just around you.
Yes. So for me, I'm like, okay, it seems like things that are more orderly seem to be more resilient and more successful. So what am I going to do? Partake in disorderly behavior or orderly behavior? Ultimately, I've become a pariah in my industry because I tend to try and become negentropic. I tend to catch a lot of flack for that, but I think long term, in 15, 20 years, people will probably watch this podcast and be like, holy shit. I cannot believe the way that people did things the way that they did. And the thing is, I get to try explaining the problem to people, but they're only going to be able to understand the problem only to the degree that they can understand the solution. And once they experience the solution, they'll look at things around and be like, that's how people used to try and fix their problems? Really? Well, that's so high maintenance. Oh, that was so, a steam engine, you had to have somebody there just constantly dumping coal into a fire? Like, really? Like what? We have like wind turbines.
It's like the post office versus email. You know,
that's what I mean.
Like, come on.
It's kind of that's exactly how I see it as well. It's just kind of like, I think people will look back but I don't think people that were in the post office had an attachment to the post office.
No, right, exactly.
Right? I think the post office wasn't like, well, this is bogus. We can't send letters.
Or horse and buggy versus car. It's like,
in our industry, what is it? Our industry, it's we can't compress our lumbar spines with deadlifts. Exactly. What are you talking about? The fact that people have an identity around this, be like, you're telling me that like I can't do ayahuasca and that I can achieve some level of personal enlightenment without ayahuasca? What are you talking about? And not to bag on psychedelics. I think they have their utility, but it's just like the way that people try solving for their problems is ridiculous, I think, in many regards. And what I think is that in the future, when people become more negentropic, more ordered instead of chaotic, they're going to look back. When we finally learn the lesson, when we partake in the relativist period, and we don't stay in the confused absolutist relativist period, and we get out of the absolutist period in its full effect, the doctrine with the Brotherhood of Doctrines. If you guys are wondering what I just said was about, read the Brotherhood of Doctrines. It's one of the most important documents I think I've ever witnessed. It's pretty much describing what's going on with our species right now. Might be worthwhile to look into. But essentially, I think eventually people are going to look back and be perplexed at the idea that anybody would be obsessed with putting a barbell on their back and trying to lift as much weight as they possibly can. I think that they'll look back and be like, that's absolutely insane. But it's not fun to do that. It gives me anxiety to have to like think about that because I'm like, I feel like in many regards I'm traumatized and I'm like, oh, I'm always a buzzkill because I'm like, I want more order and less chaos. Like I want more order, please.
Well,
more
I like that you're
please.
staying congruent to that because actually I remember at a course, and I like that Rodney brought it up because he was like, you understand what the implications of order, therefore you're trying to create more order. And I remember at a course, you were like, do you guys think am I doing it for you? Am I doing it for you? And you were like, and we were all like, yeah. And you're like, no. I'm doing it for myself, and I relate with that because it's like, I don't do.
What did you think when I said that?
Well, I loved it, but I've always been, and when I
did you look around the room at all?
I said, Well, yeah, well, right, yes.
How did people take it? Did they take it pretty well? Or
well, some people always, like, there are always people who, by the time they're at a course, for the most part, you know what I mean, they're already
They've
kind of
drank the
understand where
Kool-Aid,
you're
the
coming
functional
from. That's
Kool-Aid.
right, exactly. So, but for me personally, I've always identified with that because it's like I don't clean the dishes for somebody else.
Yes.
I do the dishes because I don't want dirty dishes I don't do my laundry because I don't want to wear dirty clothes,
Yes.
you know? I don't optimize my biomechanics because, you know, I'm doing it for, you know, my mom or dad. I'm doing it for myself, and then therefore then I am inevitably doing it for other people because I become better for society, right? My structure has a tendency to have a cascade effect. That's what we're saying about what Naudi said. One of the best things I love that you said in this podcast is progression and regression analysis, and how there are spectrums. That's a very important tyranny of words concept, right? When my cells create more order, we're talking about cellular signaling, we're talking about cascade effects, we're talking about intelligent biological systems, right? So that's what we're saying. Creating more structure in those systems across the board is going to make things objectively better.
The solution is not managing scarcity, it's creating more abundance.
That's why, you know, that was a big one.
My whole vantage point is, we've all heard of the expression, what do you bring to the table?
Right.
Right? Yeah. For me, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to bring the table, I'm going to bring the forks, spoons, knives, and plates, and then I'm going to have a actual factory of food that's just dumping food on the table.
Right.
But
How it feels.
but I'm going to get my share.
Right.
I'm going to get my share and eat my
That's
food.
right,
But
exactly.
I'm going to feed hundreds of millions of people.
That's right.
That's through my structure, through the structural
Because
that I build into society.
Either
that
you
I build
create
into my
all
body.
that and it's like good quality food, or you have to depend or other people and just get shitty food, or maybe get your plate of food, but it's kind of shitty food.
Yeah, for me, it's I
Right.
want everybody getting the best quality
That's
food.
right. And
Because you
imagine-
also want the good quality food.
Exactly.
And imagine if everyone did that.
Yes.
Is the idea.
It's just that we can't be naive, and this is the type of stuff that people used to tell me way back in the day that I'm
Sure.
like, Naudi's negative, he's overly cynical, but he's always so negative. And I'm just saying, like, no, I'm realistic. And I think
Yes.
people now are like becoming aware of this woke agenda where it's
That's
like,
right.
oh, I'm a selfless person.
Yeah.
I care about the environment. I'm
Yes.
just trying to help people.
Right.
And I'll be very, very forthright with people. I'm not trying to help anybody more than I'm trying to help myself.
That's right.
And I'm trying to help myself way more. It just so happens that if I help myself in this situation, you're also going to become helped. And there's
Right.
mutual benefit that comes with that helping. So for me personally, but don't get me wrong, the reason I want to help others is because I know that comes back.
Of course.
We're a team at the end of the day. You understand that you're on a team. And dude, there literally is a joy, and I think it's a biologically driven joy
Sure.
of knowing when you alleviate somebody's suffering.
Absolutely.
God damn it. That is just like the fucking, that's just like the best. When somebody's like, you know, I had all these limitations within myself.
right.
And now they're not there? What? Like, I don't have to like orient myself around my pain with everything that I do. I don't have to be anxious and worry all the time.
Yep.
I'm like, you know what's funny? I used to feel that exact same way too. I used to feel exactly like you too. And now I don't feel worried all the damn time.
Yep.
Good Lord. And I felt worried when I had money. I was worried while I fucking had a bunch of money already. I've had money for a while.
Sure.
I'm a pretty good business person.
Sure.
And so I've had money for a while, and I still feel worried. And I'm like, what the fuck do I need to do to get on the other side of this mental problem? And it's mostly what I found. A good chunk of it, the majority of it is physical. I think what was I think he was a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, a neurologist. What was the guy's name? He said that 90% of our brain's processes orient to movement.
I can't remember the name.
Can't remember either right now.
It orients around moving your body in its center of mass. I think that's what it is. And so quite literally, if you reorient your center of mass properly, that gives way to being able to heal, have better mental health and whatnot, all those things. But the key point is there is something to be said about helping other people. I think nature selected that we have more quote unquote loving relationships with each other that are actually caring for a reason. But what does it really mean to care? Is it, oh, Mike, you're doing a great job, buddy. You know, you're screwing off with your life, but you're gonna be all right. Is that caring, or it's like, hey, bro? Remember how I told you to separate the motion of your femur from your hip?
That's right.
You're fucking your shit up unless you figure that out. And keep this in mind, I realize that I come off as I am an intense person. That's just how I am. I think it's great. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I've learned to accept it. I think it's great. And so I'm very intense when I train people. I care deeply because I'm like, okay, like I understand that helping others helps me. So with that in mind, I'm just thinking about it from the vantage point that, I'm having a brain fart here. I'm coming at it from the vantage point that it's like what people think caring is most of the time is not caring.
That's extremely important.
It's like you're not caring for somebody if you're pushing them off if they're like, hey, look, I want to walk off this bridge, and then you just nudge them off and you encourage them to jump off the bridge. That is not caring.
That's the fitness novelty machine. And that's what we were talking about on the other podcast, because we had these guys comment. We were talking, we did the reaction to their deadlifting video, and then we said, no, deadlifting is not it. It's about gait training. And they said, typical, either or, blah, blah, blah. But what we're saying is not typical. What we're saying is atypical. The fitness novelty machine will euphemistically tell you that you can do whatever you want. They will pat you on the knee and say, yes, you can do yoga.
So long as you're moving.
Correct. So long as you're moving, you're doing great. Good job, blah, blah, blah. But what they're doing is they're enabling you rather than telling you the right information.
This is the equivalent that I could draw if you're into investment at all. It's like saying, so long as you got money in the market, you're doing just fine. You could just diversify, put your money into every single thing, and you're going to end up becoming a millionaire. Don't worry about it.
Right.
It's the literal equivalent to it.
Yep.
Where you decide to place your investments matters a lot. I notice you guys are giggling over there. Is it worth addressing or no? Okay. Just nonsense?
No. Someone was just saying Naudi looks like Frieza gold version, massive transformation.
Let's go, baby. I look like, no, I shouldn't look like Frieza. He's got like a tiny little nose. I need wider nostrils. No, I have a lot to work on. If I get on the other side of this, I'm gonna it's gonna break the internet. If I get on the other side of what I'm gonna do, it will fucking break the internet, and it'll be the last thing that possibly breaks the internet if I pull this off. So, and then at that point, it'll just be like, okay, we come to the internet as a public utility and not a place to escape our reality. But no, I'm not. Yeah. So if I look like Frieza, that's not necessarily the best thing. Which one's Frieza?
Frieza's the purple guy.
It's the purple.
Yeah,
but there's a bunch of versions of
beast.
him.
But yeah,
He's pretty beast.
He is, but his nose is all pointy.
Yeah,
like,
he doesn't have a good cranial
no big
development
jaw.
and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's not very good.
Yeah, just on that same note, there were a lot of comments about Naudi looking jacked. Bro, Naudi's got huge arms.
It's the lighting, guys. It's not that impressive. But yeah, go ahead.
Naudi put on more mass in the last months since he's been away from social media.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I haven't. It's not necessarily that I put on more mass. It's just the lighting, guys. You guys got me like, I'm getting a little bit leaner, but no, I don't think I've really gotten. No, I'm a turd. Like just straight up, guys. Like I'm not. I'm like. This is the Instagram. So if you guys are watching on YouTube or whatever, I'm responding to people on Instagram. It's not that I got more massive. You guys may have caught me on a good day or something. But no, my body is very disproportional. I'm literally just getting started. I'm probably about. I always keep saying this because it always keeps like the deeper I understand. It's like that more you know, the more you don't know kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm probably like 1% or 2% of the way there. I think.
Sure.
There's a lot of problems that I have. A lot of problems. Bones need to grow. Tissues need to develop. Bones need to reform. All kinds of stuff. So yeah, I haven't really put on more mass. It's just probably the tank top and then the lighting, bro.
Right.
We got good top lighting. That's what most of this is.
But you're also maintaining that mass as you get older without the use of exogenous anabolic agents,
bro.
which is a big thing.
Let's be very real, guys. Within time, people are going to be like, you use steroids to actually enhance yourself?
Yeah.
People, like my grandma can dunk a basketball.
Right.
My grandma's 100 years old and she's like doing 360 windmill dunks.
Sure.
You use steroids to try and enhance yourself.
Yeah.
No, you get what I mean?
Sure.
That's what it's going to be in the future.
Yeah.
Steroids aren't even that much of an actual enhancement.
Sure.
Like Kyle Dake is not on steroids and he wrestles at the highest levels in wrestling.
Exactly.
Johnny Eblen is fighting at the highest levels in MMA and he is not on steroids.
Right.
I can confirm because if they ever did get on steroids, let me put it, they better correct the behavior. Otherwise, I would never work with them again because I just don't think it's right to do.
Yep.
We were supposed to talk about that whole steroid thing too, right? Maybe we'll save it for another podcast.
Yeah, I mean, either way, we touched on it a bit, but in what regard?
We touched on it, being high maintenance.
You were talking about the maintenance of it, but
I was about to speak on the whole idea of people taking advice. I guess I'll just quickly say it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this whole idea of like steroids for enhancement. It's like it doesn't really enhance you that much, but even beyond that, it's like relative to where we're at right now, it's not even an enhancement. It's like a distortion, but it does enhance certain things.
Sure.
but it's long term. It doesn't really enhance much. But what I was going to say is just like I won't even get into it. We'll save it for another one.
Okay.
We'll save it for another one. I think I'm pretty much kind of tapped out too, guys. If that's okay.
No,
I think
that's fair.
I'm kind of like reached that.
We talked about a lot.
Is there anything else that people wanted to cover that popped up that might be interested?
A couple of good questions. With the lead thing, can optimizing mechanics help increase neuroplasticity?
No, I think the only way to do it.
Yes, the one thing actually from the last question was there are studies talking about running and neurogenesis. So once again, you have to take into consideration why the brain formed in the first place. So if we're thinking about that quote, about 90% is oriented towards movement, right? That because without movement, you wouldn't be able to carry out any objectives, right? In order to get water, you have to be able to walk. In order to hunt prey, you have to be able to run, right? So you have to have a certain hand-eye coordination. So your brain is developed, is oriented towards movement, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is, you know, when Naudi, or I'm sorry, when Robert Sapolsky, for example, we posted recently on the Project Function podcast. I just feel like this is really important too. It relates to neuroplasticity, but this was a really important thing talking about the metabolic drive when it comes to your decisions. So Robert Sapolsky, who, if you don't know who that is, he is a famous scientist, biologist, behaviorist, observer of animals, etc., kind of zoologist in a way. And he talked about how there was this study where they were analyzing judges' decisions in the courtroom as to whether or not a plaintiff got parole. And so
they approved parole.
Yes, exactly. So in order to get parole, whether or not they decided whether that person got it, it was based on whether or not they had eaten lunch or not. So before lunch, if they hadn't eaten, they didn't have as much metabolic sustenance in order to empathize with the person that they were giving the sentence to. And then after lunch, it ended up giving them much lighter sentences or shorter parole, things like that. And the reason that is because your prefrontal cortex requires so much metabolic sustenance that if they didn't eat, it would literally, the number one correlation was whether or not they had whether or not it was before or after lunch.
Mind-boggling.
How close to lunch and then after lunch.
Right, which relates back to, okay, if you asked the judge why they did this or that, he was saying it was a joke, they would probably quote Immanuel Kant to you. In other words, once again, back to Tyranny of Words, they would relate it to some sort of abstract philosophy, when in reality, it's about the amount of metabolic energy that it takes to really think about the decisions that you're making, right?
It's wild.
So if you're going to talk about neuroplasticity and stuff like that, it's complicated. There's only so much that they know about the brain. But back to that original thing, neurogenesis, if you're talking about neuroplasticity, developing movement variability in relation to the first principles of Gait is probably going to get you neuroplasticity.
Well, to get on this whole topic, I guess to answer the question regarding neuroplasticity, if you're asymmetrical and you're building neuroplasticity on asymmetry, eventually you're going to structurally break down.
That's right.
And then you're going to lose the structure. You're going to become more, you're going to accelerate entropy.
Yep.
And become more disordered, and then at that point, you are not going to have many places to create neuroplasticity anymore. Do they ever characterize whether there's such a thing as functional and dysfunctional neuroplasticity?
I'm not sure. I haven't heard of it, but I do.
Like if I have a conversation about love with a bunch of people,
yes,
does that boost neuroplasticity?
Right.
That's the question.
I doubt it.
I don't know.
I probably would say, I don't know.
Those people,
because most people usually assume that if you're challenging your brain,
yes,
it's going to be. So I guess that's a question that I'll leave for the audience. If somebody knows the answer to that question in the comment section, I'd really like to know it, because I don't think ChatGPT is going to give me an answer to that question.
Because Krzyzewski goes into like the structure of neurons and certain thoughts.
Yes.
So I would imagine.
Well, and then Michael Levin is talking about how all cells have the characteristics of nerve cells, right?
Yes.
Wasn't that the whole thing? And that's the bioelectrics of it.
Yes.
So.
The way that I think about it this way is, I'm like, I could do things right now. At some point, I'll probably maybe consider going back to school. So then at that point, I could get a degree in engineering, probably something like that, or probably physics. I'd probably want to do it. And I could probably push my brain to do that with my drive to do it. But I'd realize that if I spent my time orienting my thoughts to my brain, if I spent my time orienting my choices or my efforts to my brain to develop that kind of an ability to extrapolate reality, it's going to compromise my body. It's going to compromise my fascia, my muscles, and whatnot. So I don't think that you can chase both avenues. I think at some point you have to make a commitment. You have to make a hierarchy of prioritization. And my situation is, I need to make sure that I have a physical body for a much longer period of time so I could actually attain the goals that I want to achieve. I'd like to maybe make music again one day. I'd like to be able to train the martial arts regularly. I'd like to be able to run really, really fast, go on all kinds of crazy hikes, skydiving, you name it. I'd like to do so many things with my life, but I can't do that if I don't have a physical body. Yeah. So if I'm going to use my plasticity, it's going to be towards my body, towards my fascia. And I think that a big thing to think about is that if you're asymmetrical and you're exercising, every single time that you go through any thought, you're making an association in your body with that thought. Right. It's impossible for that thought to not run through your body in some way, shape, or form. So quite literally, if you are sitting at a desk and you're reading a book or you're watching a podcast and it's testing your neuroplasticity, you are literally, in many ways, shape, or form, as I see it intuitively, almost, ossifying your body at an accelerated rate. So it's like people talk about neuroplasticity like it's a great thing. I'm all for it. I think it's great. How you go about it matters a lot. And I think the safest way to develop neuroplasticity, and the most important way, the longest lasting way that's ever existed, is by moving correctly. Right. That's the way that but not just moving in a way that's just, hey, just move around. It's like you have to move with the intent to actually create more order and structure inside of your body. Otherwise, you're going to make your body more chaotic. And then when you make it more chaotic, it's going to tend to want to fall apart.
Yeah, I was going to say with Michael Levin preserving the architecture, if you're preserving your anatomy, then by default, you're also going to, it's not just your muscles.
So the whole idea, my whole life is about neuroplasticity.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, that's literally it.
Because it would imply adaptation.
Do you guys ever remember that meme that I put up I think it was back in 2013, 2014, I think it was? I put it up on the Functional Patterns Facebook page way back in the day. And I put Columbo or whatever, there was a Franco Columbo, he's a bodybuilder.
That's right.
Back in the 70s. I put a picture of him, and then I put less than, and then I put a giant crane, and then I put human capability, and then I put human body capability, human brain capability. That's right. And so from my whole vantage point, the whole point of FP was to literally enhance the brain. Sure. That's really what it is. FP is about neuroplasticity and then some. And then I learned more. Once you start learning about the fascial system, you're like, does water have the memory? Like, let me this is like perplexing, right?
Yes.
Robert Becker dissects the brain off of a salamander.
Right.
He cuts out the brain, and then the salamander regenerates a new brain.
Talk about neuroplasticity.
So where does this come from? Right? What has the actual memory? Is it only the brain? I'm not saying it's only the brain. Right. So I just think about stuff like this all the time. I'm like, where does the intelligence really actually come from?
Then that's in that video with Michael Levin too. He's talking about how cells can recruit other cells, even not from their original
Pretty much what's happening, what I would guess is happening, what I would postulate, and I think this is what Michael Levin would probably say, is that somewhere the cells are saying, hey, wait a minute, let's do a check on what's going on in the body. Sure. There's something missing, and since we're very negatively entropic, we're massively in negative entropy, there's something missing, and it's our brain. Let's reform a brain. Yeah. So that to me is beyond perplexing. Sure. I'm like, how, and the fact that humans are so amazing in the capacity that they can actually conduct experiments like that too. Right? It's amazing that we could have people on TikTok doing the shit that they do. And then you end up
Michael Levin.
Michael Levin or Robert. Yeah. Michael Levin's like doing stuff with xenobots. He's literally creating new life forms
come on.
It's crazy.
It's nuts.
It's amazing. But so for me, that to me is a kind of plasticity that I think matters. The ones that Michael Levin are developing are the ones that Robert Becker had. Yes. My real objective is, how much better do you guys think I've always had this thought, how much better would the world be if Albert Einstein was still alive?
Man.
What a tragedy, right? Yeah. Imagine if Isaac Newton was still alive. Sure. Yeah. Good Lord, right? Leibniz, if he was still alive, these things would just be incredible. Imagine how much they would know being able to take on more. Yep. If they could live 300, 400 years. That's right. We would already be in a complete utopia by then. Sure. And so it's like, for me, that to me underlines like my main motive is that don't get me wrong, like I'm not a big fan of people for the most part, but I am a big fan of what people can become
Sure.
if the circumstances are organized well enough for them to like exercise their potential.
That's right.
But I'm not a big fan of people. You could call me a hater, whatever it is. I'm just not a big fan of most people.
Sure.
But I am a big fan of what the human potential is. And that to me is like what I find of particular interest. And that's really what FP is about ultimately. Bro. That's my objective, is trying to maximize neuroplasticity in all the most relevant ways so we can enhance this thing better. For me, of course, it's not for...
But you are empathetic to the fact that people are also products of their environment.
It's not their fault, so I don't hate anybody. I hate the behavior.
Sure.
I don't hate the organism, because they're just reflecting the environment.
That's right.
That's just, I mean, that's an actual fact of reality. Anybody who tries it, and conservatives will usually try fighting against that, but those are guys, I don't think they really... let me put it this way, I don't think they really believe it, because I've spoken to them in person, and I break these things down and they just go mute. They don't say anything. When I say it right in front of their face, they're just like, I'm just gonna shut up and just sit here and eat it. And I'm like I'm like, give me something, like prove me wrong, for fuck's sake. Tell me that free will exists. Like, explain it to me. Explain the physics to me as to how it actually exists. Because it just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. We have some degree of free will, but it's like, if you put it on a spectrum, we have like 0.000000001% of free will, and then the remaining is a biological determinism.
No question about it.
So I'll go one more, and that's pretty much it.
Sure. Raphael 6.0. What causes the change in the food you desire? Is it the memories associated with junk food that are now able to reset?
It's just the design of our body. That's really what it is. It's the architecture of the body. Like, going back to the whole thing with the Lamborghini, it needs better fuel because the design of the engine in order for it to function, it has to be there. It really comes down to this. If I can make you feel good physically, like if I can make you feel like really, really good physically,
right,
and that physical feeling you get from doing the exercises and the protocols that we apply make you feel that much better, better than when you eat the pizza, then what are you gonna do?
You're gonna
not eat the pizza.
Right, that's the associative
memory. So quite literally, if the greatest high I ever get is when I tune in and my body just starts going clack, clack, and I'm like, and then quite literally there's like a poof, and you're like, oh shit, what a relief. And you feel that relief, you're like, that's what pizza kind of does for me.
Yes.
That's what, when I used to eat McDonald's chicken McNuggets, and thank God I got off of that years ago, but when I used to eat chicken McNuggets, I was like, I'm gonna eat these things, and I'm like, oh, okay, there's a little bit of this downregulation, this temporary downregulation of stress. But when you get that downregulation of stress for several hours, and you're not having to think about it, and you're just talking to people and you kind of feel that way,
you don't
it's
need
like
chicken nuggets.
Yeah, that to me, it just comes down to that. If I can give a person better feelings, they're going to be more inclined to want to go. If I can make a person feel better doing the right thing than making them feel better doing the wrong thing, then they're going to do the better thing. It's a structural imposition. It's like, why do people why do people just make a bunch of garbage? Why do we keep making garbage?
Because
is it smart to have landfills? No, clearly not.
Well,
it's just dumb, right? It doesn't make sense to have landfills. But why do we do it? A lack of structure.
That's right.
It always comes back to that.
We haven't figured out a better way.
Exactly. So I forgot how I was going to relate that to this. So ultimately, what if we made it easier to recycle? What if we made it easier to reuse because we were structured differently? Then at that point, what ends up becoming the automatic for the individual?
That's right.
If the environment is so nurturing to a person that it's pointless to commit a crime, then people will not they will not commit crimes.
Yes.
It's like if the conditions are different, then if the conditions are different, then the organism is going to behave differently. That's the whole idea with all of it. What was the question again? I want to make sure I don't lose it.
About what drives the diet change in the body.
Yeah, what
is the fact that you're resetting memories?
No, really what it is that you feel good.
Yeah.
So it's reinforcement. This goes back to B.F. Skinner stuff. It's just you're reinforcing what feels good. It's a reward. That's what's amazing. That's what I guess I'll close it out with this. What made me really go down this path was when I started doing myofascial release. And fortunately, I had enough organization in my body to so when I did a release, instead of disorganizing and dismembering myself, which might happen to a lot of yogis, I did the MFR and then my body reorganized itself better. So I was fortunate enough to have enough athletic genes to be able to do that. But for me, what prompted me to keep going down this path was because I was depressed. I was suicidal. Like, I've definitely contemplated suicide. It was a constant for me for years, and I battled with it like mad, like absolute mad. And what you need to do to get out of a depression, to tell you to not want to kill yourself or get yourself out of that mindset, is you need wins. You need to always win.
That's right.
And guess what? When you win, what's this thing that happens when you win? You feel good.
Right.
So the idea is to always create biological victories, get natural validation victories, get validated by nature, and continue to accumulate wins through natural validation. And if you accumulate those wins through natural validation, within time you get out of this cycle of like, I feel like shit all the time, let me eat this food so I can temporarily feel good.
Right.
I feel like shit all the time, let me smoke this weed so I can go back to feeling temporarily good.
Right.
Eventually you feel so good that you're like, I just smoked this joint and it's completely ruining my fucking high. I'm done smoking this because I feel great when I'm not high. Why would I want to put this in my body that completely ruins my high? Right. If I'm high all the time, which I am, I feel like I have explosions going on in my brain. It's like a fireworks show every second of the day. Like, why would I want to get high if I can be sober and I'm high? It just destroys the high.
Right.
It's not to say that marijuana doesn't have utility. It can. But I think if you feel good and you're already naturally high, endogenously, why would you go down that path later on down the line? Why would you eat the pizza? Why would you drink the beer if you constantly feel good about yourself? And keep this in mind, I haven't even actualized what I'm talking about. I'm like literally just like nudging my way in. I'm nudging my way up to the courage to be able to actually transcend my archetype. I'm afraid of it. It's like the second that you feel a structural imposition happen on your body and you're like, oh shit, I hope I don't throw up right now because I don't want to throw up. But then you're like, okay, I'm nauseous. I'm like, oh, I don't want to throw up. Be like, well, why are you nauseous? I'm like, oh, because your esophagus is freaking, your esophagus and your T-spine junction you have a constant pressure somewhere. I don't know where the anatomy is, but there's this constant pressure here that's triggering like this, almost like a gag reflex. And I'm like, I'm structurally screwed up. And why is that? Because my vertebrae spine never fully grew. They never positioned correctly. My legs never fully grew. How do I account for this problem? And I'm like, oh shit, okay, now I got to deal with this. And then I start dealing with it. And then quite literally, to go onto this tangent of meditation real quick, you are not meditating if you are not becoming more structured in your body.
Right.
It's not real meditation.
Right.
So the idea is I get into this meditative state, my physical body begins to change, and then it's like I reach this point where I'm like, it's this anxiety hits, this nauseousness hits, and I'm like, oh God, now I got to face this shit. And there's like, now I'm reaching an age or at a level of maturity, I guess you could classify it as, or maybe I'm just getting trapped, I don't know. I'm reaching a point in my development where I'm like, I can't eat junk food and then feel satisfied by it. Quite literally, I'm like, I have to face this. So a lot of this is me just developing the courage to face this, because that's a big part of it. And that was a conversation I had with this one kid. He was a wrestler out of Cornell. And I explained all this stuff to him. He was all big into Jordan Peterson. I like Jordan Peterson. I think he's got some good stuff. But there's fundamentally, as it relates to talking about purpose and that you need to have a self-imposed purpose, he doesn't even say your purpose needs to be connected to natural mechanisms. Right. I'm like, that's beyond, like, it's incorrect to the worst degree that you could be incorrect. It's just like, if you have a purpose, it needs to correspond to our biology.
That's right.
It needs to coincide with it automatically. There's no compromises with it. But I talked to him about it, and I would say, you understand what I'm telling you when it comes to this incongruence of your goals and your life's purpose with your biological imperatives. And he's like, he had no arguments or no counter positions. And I'm like, this is obviously a kid from an Ivy League university.
Sure.
Clearly not a dumbass.
Sure.
I'm like, okay, definitely a smart guy, great brain matter.
Sure.
And I was like, and he just blew it off, was like, whatever, right?
Right.
Time passes, it's a few years that have passed, and he's like, yeah, I completely face-planted listening to that whole idea, and it's like, now I'm having to reconfigure everything. And I was like, out of curiosity, why did you not choose to listen to me when I told you that thing before? What about it didn't make sense? What about it did not appear to be reasonable? He's like, it's not that it was unreasonable, it was obvious. It's just I couldn't muster up the courage to face it.
Right.
And I'm like, holy shit, it's so profound.
Yep.
I was like, damn, like, and I keep thinking about every single time that I'm trying to transcend my archetype. Maybe that's why I maybe look a little bit more muscular. This is the whole thing, guys. When I look in the mirror, I see all my problems. The thing is, most of the time, people will like position themselves in the mirror to be like, okay, I look better here.
Yeah.
I dress this way to cover it up. Mm-hmm. I don't see that person anymore, so I can't be confident because I see the problems, and I'm like, whew, I am in trouble, right? I see the problems constantly. So that's all I see are the problems. But it's like, I'm realizing that the further I develop the courage to face this problem, which I think is what people lack, is the courage to face it. It's not because it's disagreeable. It's just scary. Yeah. And it's scary because you look around at the world and you're like, I'm not going to have because it's a slippery slope. And what's the slippery slope? That we're not going to be in capitalism forever.
Right.
And that's going to change. And that quite literally the nature of how we understand ourselves as biology is going to change, and that humans are going to completely deviate from the way that the way that nature has done certain things.
Right.
We're going to align with nature in some ways, but as it relates to being competitive with each other, as it relates to having all this animosity and engaging in gossip, that shit's all going to go away eventually. It's going to all go away because it will be pointless to. It will be completely irrelevant to engage in that. Right. Nobody will stand to gain in engaging in that kind of behavior in the future. There won't be a gain. Like in Japan, they've already kind of figured this out, and they're highly structured.
Yep.
If you're one of these gossiping people in Japan, or if you're one of these people constantly trying to trigger drama, they're not very much into there. They still have their problems, don't get me wrong. But we're going to move into that direction of no longer having drama with each other, because obviously, if you're Jake Paul and you're starting drama with another guy and all this, and then people watch it, he makes millions of dollars from doing that. Right. There's going to come a point where society is not going to be oriented that way, and we're going to have to change the way that we do everything. Right. So quite literally, it's scary. And what people don't recognize is that it's not that we like feeling the way that we do. It's not that we like being who we are. More than anything, it's that we have an association to being who we are. Right. It's familiar. Yeah. We don't go towards necessarily what always just feels good. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we do find that relevant thing that makes us feel good. Mm-hmm. Exercise, for example, happens to be one of those things that makes us feel good, and we go towards it, and it's the right thing to do. Right. But there are many times where we do the wrong thing that we probably shouldn't do. Sure. And we do it anyway, and we do it not because it feels good, but just because it feels familiar. It's like people who've been traumatized, they revert back to the same archetype of this type of person that abuses them over and over and over again. Sure. Why? Because it's familiar, and that's how they associate love in their life. Yes. So the whole idea is, it's like, this familiarity has to become addressed. This trauma that we're experiencing has to be addressed. And I think eventually when we address it fully, that familiarity will be gone, and we will no longer look at each other as enemies, but quite literally as just constant assets. We'll hold each other accountable, but this whole notion of stepping on each other the way that we do will no longer be relevant. Right. That's the scary part of it. The scary part is that it's not familiar to live in a world like that. And what I'm proposing is that we live in a world like that, but I'm not saying that we just make the decision to just be loving with one another. Yeah, right. That's where I'm like, okay, that's that whole quote, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. That's right. Right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not telling that people act nice to one another. What I'm saying is that we structure the society in such a said way that eliminates the conditions for people to behave in such horrible ways with one another. Right. You address the conditions, and if you address the conditions adequately and you develop enough structure, if you structure the humans themselves and you structure the society well enough through the development of technology, if you just structure the brain, you structure the human to no longer want to keep accumulating crap for no reason, and then you structure the society to that, essentially you end up having a more sustainable ecosystem and a more sustainable species. Sure. I'm not telling people be kind to one another. That's naive. That's stupid. Right. The term is stupid to tell people, hey, just calm down. Have you guys ever been around somebody who's like uppity? And somebody said, hey, just calm down. Does that ever work? Yeah, no. It never works. So if you just say, be more loving, we need to spread love in the world. Right. That's not doing anything to address the conditions that are causing the non-loving behavior. Exactly. The key point is that we need to eliminate the rewards that come with causing drama in the civilization. And if you do that, then at that point, you end up solving our condition as a species. Right. The condition is lack of structural integrity. The condition is a lack of organization. When we figure out the organization, we slow down the entropy, and then we end up with a better world to live in. But we're not there yet. Maybe in 30 years. Maybe in 30 years. Yeah. Well, Naudi, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you, bro. Great to have you. Rodney, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it. This is Mike Musiolo with the Project Function podcast, reminding you to think intentionally and not habitually.